pastors should not apologize to their congregations for exercising their authority, right?
Yeah.
Police officers, right on down.
And that's where I've stopped. I think early on I had this notion of like when someone says, good pastor or a good sermon pastor or something, to try to minimize that.
Yeah.
And then I realized that was really just an extension of pride. And I was trying to look humble, right? Rather than just saying, what sometimes a humble thing to do is just to accept the praise of somebody who's given it. Right.
Yeah.
And that's where pride is so,
right.
It's so difficult, right? Because then pride is something you have to reflect on, because then you have to say like, okay, well now how has that affected me?
I don't see any reason in the Bible to think that demons can hear our silent thoughts.
I've heard that. Risto says that.
Oh, does he say that? Good.
Mm-hmm.
Because the demons aren't omniscient.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't see anything in the Bible to get the idea that, like, you sort of qualify what you said earlier, and we do this all the time. When we talk about Satan, it could just be some demon.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we often just say Satan, and that's fine if we know what you mean. But Satan himself is a limited being. He can't be everywhere at once. He's omnipresent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if Satan is attacking you here, then, I don't know how big he is. So, I don't know, maybe he could attack you here, and he could still attack somebody in Fort Wayne, 600 miles away or 500 miles away. But he is limited, right? Sometimes we exaggerate. We make the demons too powerful. So if you think of, like, I love Schadenfreude is a great word. I don't love Schadenfreude, but I'm very familiar with it. Right, Schadenfreude is this German word that's now in English that means you are happy at someone's sadness, right? So Schade, sadness in German, Freude, happiness or joy. So you have, so Bennett, gets a promotion, and I'm sad because something good happened to him. That's envy, right? Bennett falls down and smacks his head on the ground, and I'm happy because he's hurting. That's Schadenfreude. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So this idea that somebody else's goodness or somebody else's happiness would make me sad.
Welcome back to On the Line. We've got just a quick update on Lit for you. We've actually just finished recording our 5th course with Dr. Joel Bierman on virtue and ethics. Fantastic course. We're very excited to have these 5 courses finished. But the updates for you are, we're tentatively looking at August 4th for our release. Everything's looking good. That will be completed by that date. And we've also had a number of churches that have already signed up for the Lutheran Institute of Theology. If that's something that you are interested in learning more about, we've got professional packets available for you. You can either go to our website, and there's a pop-up there, and you can enter your email address there, or you can go to the description below, find my email address, bryan.stecker@ontheline.net. Just send me an email, and I can give you all of that information so that you can begin those conversations. So we appreciate your support, and we're excited for launch, but enjoy the episode.
All right, and Bennett says that we are back. Welcome back to On the Line, and today we're going to sit down. This is our 3rd time, technically speaking.
Yeah.
There's a very prominent group of a couple individuals that have been on 3 times.
Is that right?
Yeah. Bennett's going to send a plaque home with you. You brought D.Min chocolates. Bennett's going to have
That's a good way to get on 3rd time. Bring D.Min chocolates. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm excited. We're going to, this is going to be kind of not unique topic, but we haven't really covered this before. But so we want to cover what virtue is, right? And we're going to kind of frame it in like virtue and vice. So the way we're going to kind of break that down is through the 7 deadly sins. And Dr. Petersen, I don't know if you want to maybe just kind of lead in, but what's some of the advantage to, like, when we speak? So we'll say like we are sinners, right? And that covers the whole plethora of ways that sins manifest in our lives. And there's obviously a lot of different, lists that you could kind of take as far as how to categorize sins. You could go to the 3 temptations in the wilderness, where you have temptations of the flesh, temptations for honor, temptations for power, and that kind of helps you understand how sins manifest. But if you can maybe just speak to, as a starting point, the advantage of understanding, kind of breaking sin down and then defining it within different, kind of specters.
Well, I think the advantage, first of all, it's a biblical way of operating. There's a number of vice lists in the New Testament. St. Paul likes to, here's the things you can't do, right? And this idea that we actually need categories for sins is, I think it has to do with the fact that we're so good at escaping accusations or making excuses. So the problem is if we leave sin at a kind of abstract level, just sin. Sin is bad. Don't break the law. Or if you want to sort of put it in biblical terms, like love God, love your neighbor, right? If you leave it there, it's not false, obviously, but the problem is it can become a kind of abstraction where I can pretend to keep it. I think that's probably the big advantage of categorizing sin or using a list or in this sort of way is to recognize how pervasive sin is in us and how easily we become caught up in it and make excuses.
Mm-hmm.
So the point of it isn't to torture ourselves, but to recognize what's really at stake, right? So something like the 7 deadly sins or whatever your categorization is, or the 10 Commandments for that matter, right? It's a way of making sure it's sort of thorough and you're actually examining all aspects of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you read Dante's trilogy?
No, I haven't, to my shame. I've read Purgatorio.
Okay, well, I think that's the best of the 3. And that's one that would apply here, right? Because he breaks that down into the 7 layers that the pilgrim kind of ascends through, takes you through the 7 deadly sins.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And maybe just for those that maybe don't know what the 7 deadly sins are, we wrote this down to make sure we had the order correct. And I think sometimes it's placed in different orders, but I think this one's pretty well agreed upon. So you've got pride, and a good way to think about it. So if you use kind of Dante's imagery, you've got kind of a mountaintop, right? Yeah. So what's at the bottom, you can think of gravity, like gravity is going to be the thickest at the bottom, right? So it's the biggest and it's the most difficult to get out of. And then at least for the sake of, Dante's book, like he kind of ascends through all of the 7 different ones. And the whole point of this is really as kind of he's using allegory as a way to reflect on the nature of sin. It's less like a teaching on what purgatory is. That's not his main goal. So you got pride at the base, then you've got envy, which is kind of the daughter of pride, it's often called. And then you move on to, let's see what we got here, wrath. Then you've got avarice. Another word for avarice would be greed. Then you've got, sloth, or I think it's pronounced sloth, but most people are going to know if it is sloth. And then you've got gluttony and lust.
The animal is called a sloth.
Yeah, well, that's fair.
I just thought of that.
Yeah. Point for sloth. Yeah. So when we're talking about the 7 deadly sins, that's what we'll talk about. And what we'll kind of do is we'll go through these and kind of reflect on them, and then also kind of talk about what would be kind of the virtue or the virtues that would help kind of combat that. So maybe let's start with pride. Do you want to kind of speak to pride?
It's funny that we're doing this. I only within the last couple of years have I kind of come around to this idea that pride, that Aquinas is right about this, and that pride really is the mother of all sins. It is the sin of Satan. This is a bit speculative, of course, right? The Bible doesn't name Satan's exact sin that causes him to fall, but historically people thought it was pride. And I've more and more kind of come to see this in my own mind that's making more and more sense to me. So I think the kind of Lutheran, like what were you taught at seminary? Do you remember? Or maybe you weren't taught this. I think
in regards to pride?
No, in regards to like what is sin? Like I remember Dr. Scare be like, all sin is to maybe this is.
Not formally. I do remember, at least Luther's idea of kind of I forget what, there's maybe a Latin phrase for it, but like being
inwardly curved.
Inwardly curved, which would kind of correlate with pride. Like,
no, I was thinking if we were taught, maybe this was just my generation, we were taught all sin is unbelief. So that was a big scarism, right? All sin is unbelief. All sin is a violation of the first commandment, right? You shall have no other gods. And so it's always a faith thing. And I think that's an accurate description in a way, but that was kind of the way I was theologically raised. And so I always wanted to make sin unbelief. And then this idea that sin is pride, just seemed to me like, I don't know, just felt artificial. But I've come around on this because I think that unbelief is the ultimate pride.
Yeah.
Right? That actually there's a sense in which pride is the ultimate unbelief because it insists on its own way.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost a different way to put it, but I think it might be even a more helpful way, right? So like, for instance, if I were just hearing like unbelief is pride or unbelief is sin, right? Then I'd be like, well, so I believe in God, right? So then once that happens, of course, you'd have to kind of break that through a little bit more and be like, okay, when does unbelief manifest? But pride's pretty helpful to where, well, some people still, I taught a class on this and, one person was really confused because they were like, well, I thought pride was a good thing, and they were thinking, well, I'm proud of my son. And that's not what we're talking about. And even by the way you say that, like, I'm proud of my son, that's externally focused, right? Which would be the opposite of what really the heart of sinful pride is, which is something that's, focused in on yourself. So maybe let me give you some of the imagery from Dante, right? So I think a good image of this would be going back to Inferno, or the first book, which is his descent into hell. And at the heart of hell is Satan. And Satan is not in a fiery place, but
right.
in
ice cube, right?
Yeah, he's frozen in ice up to his chest. And then what he does is he flaps his wings. So the whole point is everything that Satan is doing is prideful. So it's oriented towards himself. But everything that he does, the harder that he tries to do this, he's actually the one keeping hell cold, right? So there's this aspect of, the prideful person, no matter what they're trying to do, even if it looks good on the surface, pride ends up using that thing that looks good on the surface, and then it's poisonous and cancerous, so it actually works to the harm of the individual. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why pride is so deadly. If you're thinking about like the deadliest of the 7 deadly sins, because you can take a prideful person and they might be prideful for like work. So it's like they work in order to build up their self-worth in the public eye, to build up wealth. You can see how it moves into all of these other sins. And then, they might retire. And then what do they do with that pride? Well, then they might become the person that looks really virtuous. So now they've accrued a lot of money and they become this philanthropist, and they're giving money away and whatnot. But the big question underneath the surface is, why are they giving it away? Yeah. And that's the question that pride makes you ask, is like, are you doing this for the sake of the other, or are you doing this for the sake of yourself? And you can really do good things for the sake of yourself. And that's where pride is really, it's very introspective in that nature. Right.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And that does get to the kind of Luther idea of being inwardly curved and inwardly focused. So I think it's interesting. I love the way not Aquinas, Aristotle operates in the Nicomachean ethics with virtues, where it's this kind of mean, but it's not necessarily right in the middle, right? So if you're talking about courage, he's going to say the opposite of courage isn't cowardice. Or rather, how's this go? The opposite of cowardice isn't courage. Mm-hmm. The opposite of cowardice is being rash. And so courage is kind of between the two, right? To just be, Luther has this thing about running like a Turk into the battle and believing that God will just provide, right? And not taking any plans or using the means in front of you. That would be rash.
Yeah.
Right? So Aristotle wants to say, now, but I think sometimes we talk about this and we think, well, that's great. It's right in the middle between cowardice and rashness. Well, I don't think it's right in the middle. It's probably actually closer to rash than to cowardice, right? Mm-hmm. But there is this sort of idea that the sort of opposite of the thing is not the actual virtue. Here, I think, if you want to try to do this with the sins, it can be sort of interesting, right? What are the sort of correlations with pride? Mm-hmm. I actually think one of the correlations with pride is despair. Mm-hmm. Which again, I mean, Luther thinks this is the most dangerous sin, actually. He says that multiple times. He's really concerned about despair. And how is it that despair is pride? Well, it sort of thinks that what's happening to me is unjust, and that I'm I'm having this attention focused upon me because I'm so kind of important, I guess. Mm-hmm. Right. So think about the people. That just sounds funny when people say, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it becomes hyper self-focused, right? You can't even see beyond your own suffering. Yeah.
And you kind of refuse in pride to sort of receive comfort from the gospel. Yeah. Right. Or to trust God's word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where, Chesterton, he talks about, I think it's in Orthodoxy. I think he's got a chapter that's kind of geared towards it, but he talks about the suicide. And he says a murder wants to blot out a piece of creation, but the suicide wants to blot out all of creation. It wants to shut the entire thing down. And that's kind of
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's terrible in a way, but you can see how it's so sneaky, right? The other kind of thing that's always interesting with pride is what's the role? You already brought up kind of the way that in common English we use pride in a different sense, in a kind of positive sense. Maybe grateful would be a slightly better word. Yeah. I'm grateful for my son. But there is something to this proud language. What about ambition?
Mm.
Right? Have you ever done any thinking about like how much ambition is appropriate, or is just, again, the sort of what's the kind of virtue that goes along with pride is probably humility.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So where's ambition fall in there?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think we kind of want to pretend like we shouldn't have any ambition.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that.
Well, I think that comes from, because you can get this on both sides. So like, okay, so you've got pride and humility, and sometimes what that's thought of is, yeah, so like you think of the prideful person, you think of someone who's like, working 70 hours a week, and it's like their identity is in their work, and they're very they're very kind of fragile in that way, because like if that work was taken away from them, who would they be, right? So it's very much bolstering up of yourself. But then sometimes humility is thought of as kind of passiveness, but it's not passiveness. Like the difference is going to be, what are you oriented towards, right? So sometimes you think the person that's more quiet, and this is kind of your point of despair, you think, oh, well, that's someone that's definitely not prideful, but they might be. And there's a fact that sometimes there's a timidness that comes out of pride, where like you're hyper scared of, and now some people are extroverts and some are introverts, but regardless of where you're at on that spectrum, there can be this unwillingness to put yourself out there, because you are still hyper concerned with yourself, right? So like then it's all about, pride is, are things inwardly focused? Is that the reason why you do what you do? And then the humility is going to be the reason that you do what you do is outwardly focused. And to your point, like if you're ambitious, the question is, well, what are you ambitious for? Right. And are you ambitious in service of other people? That's going to be humility, but it's going to be humility in action. And it doesn't make you, that's where sloth comes in, right? Or sloth comes in, because if you plug that in, like sometimes you think the slothful person is sometimes, they might have humility, right? But that's not necessarily the case. It's all about like, what are you oriented towards? And that's where when Lewis picks up on it in, I think, Mere Christianity, he says, at the heart of pride is competitiveness. Okay. So he applies it to like avarice or greed. And he'll say, the prideful person, it's not about how much money they have. It's all about, do they have more than the other person, right? So there's that competitive aspect. And not just like we're doing sports, we're playing a game, but it's all about, I never have enough until I've beaten the world.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, so that's interesting. So if the ambition is towards service of others, there has to be, the desire to get things done is not in and of itself wicked, right? The principal of our school started our school. It was pretty ambitious. And I didn't think it would work, actually. I was wrong again, and he was right, and it's been a great blessing. But I was supportive, but in the back of my mind, I was like, this is not going to fly. It took a lot of, but I don't think he was proud in it. He was ambitious, right? He wanted to get something done. I'm sure it was marked at some level with, sin, but I think that's I like that. It was because the ambition, insofar as the ambition was for this good, this external good for other people, service of neighbor, that's legit and godly, as opposed to ambition to get credit for something, right? Or to be noticed by people, praised, the praise of men. Chrysostom, makes a big deal here about that's the fall of the preacher.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
I think, and when we get to like envy, that's the one that I reflect on the most as being the most deadly.
I can't remember.
For me.
I thought it was in, maybe it's Mere Christianity also. I thought it was Lewis that talks about sloth as despair.
That could be.
This idea.
Yes.
I think he was saying like, we think it's laziness, like you're just lazy, but it's actually having given up hope. Like there's no reason. And it couldn't have been Lewis, because here's the poster boy, the anti-sloth character from the Lord of the Rings is Sam.
Yeah. Right.
Because even though it seems like it's pointless, and he's like, well, we just got to do what's in front of us. Like he does not give up hope. And I thought it seems like this is I remember reading about this, and there was this kind of boasting that this is the quintessential Englishman. That's why I thought it was Lewis. Yeah. Like this is the ultimate, this is what it means to be. I'm not English, right? I don't mean English speakers. I mean people that live in Great Britain.
Yeah.
And that like their big thing is, they're not the toughest, they're not the strongest, they're not the smartest, right? But they don't quit.
Yeah.
And anyway.
Well, there's a picture in that Hideous Strength where kind of charity comes down, which is going to certainly embody. So I should clarify. So there's kind of this there's these spiritual realms, which represent spiritual beings, which represent things like one's actually liturgy that comes down, which is a really interesting part. So liturgy comes down, but when charity comes down, it's humility embodied, but it's absolutely fierce. It's like the fiercest. It's the fiercest of things that can be, right? And that's where this love that's other oriented is extraordinarily fierce. And you can certainly see that play out when you hear the stories of the saints.
Yeah,
you can see that there's an absolute boldness. To your point, there's no lack of ambition. There's no kind of hesitancy when you think of like the story of a martyr or something like that, or you can think of Saint Stephen, as he's being stoned, right? Like, I mean, there's this kind of fierceness to it. But the reason that fierceness comes, it's because like you're being plugged into that which is real, right? And that which is artificial is this kind of self-perception that I have of myself. And if the whole world is geared towards this self-perception that I have of myself, the world is entirely small. But once you wrench out of that, and that's kind of what, Christ is, think about Christ. Christ is completely other-oriented, right, in all that he does. And there's certainly no, like, sloth in him. There's not, like, a lack of tenacity in anything that he does, when he's, using the whips and clearing out the temple and stuff. Like, he's extraordinarily bold, but why does he do that? Because he's kind of wrapped up into this higher purpose, right, which is the kind of divine activity. So he's wrapped up into that, and that's, that therein is the boldness. And it's the same thing for our life then. Like, if you want real boldness, it's not about you doing things to bolster up yourself. It's about you fighting for that which is good, true, and beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we do have to sort of see faith as kind of the underlying virtue behind all these others, right? Mm-hmm. So even in Christ, like his belief that his Father is good, right? Why is he obedient to his Father? And because he believes what his Father has said, right? With absolute conviction. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Right? But I'm going to proclaim your name in the land of the living, right? I mean, he knows this. He believes in this. He's looking for this. And that gives him the confidence. He doesn't need, and this is where we should be, right? Mm-hmm. He doesn't need the approval of Peter or Judas or Caiaphas, right? Yeah. He doesn't need the approval of men. He knows what God has said of him. Mm-hmm. I think that's what Luther's getting at too. Luther does this, I don't know, multiple times, at least in the Genesis lectures, where he'll pull this thing about, how we respond to despair or the accusations of the devil. And, I'm baptized, I'm a Christian, that kind of thing. We've heard a lot. I think that this is the sense of it, right? It's got to be this, the only thing I really believe, in a way, like the thing that matters, the thing that endures forever, the thing that is most real is that I'm a Christian, that God loves me, that he's chosen me, that he's named me, that he's made this promise. That's what, nothing else matters in a sense. You talk about the martyrs, Stephen is a great one too. We all love Stephen because he's such a smart aleck, right? First of all, with the, the riches of the church, right? I mean, that was a smart aleck move. And then of course, turn me over, I'm done, right? What would enable that? I think kind of modern people, myself included, we're sort of suspicious of those stories. They seem too exaggerated, too good to be true. But they were never doubted. They really were not doubted in the history of the church until very recent times. Yeah, nobody really thought it. Probably is not the way it happened. Somebody probably made that up. I think that actually faith is capable of those things. And I mean, those, of course, Stephen. I mean, not Stephen. Steve. Who is it? Lawrence. Did I call him Stephen? I'm getting confused.
Who, Lawrence?
I was trying to talk about Lawrence with the turn me over and the riches of the church. That's Lawrence.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I was very confused.
That's all right.
Stephen's in the Bible.
Yes.
Okay. So Stephen's in the Bible. And so we know that happened.
Yeah.
Right. You do have like Daniel and the three young men who also face this sort of thing with confidence, right? Even though they're not martyred, but I mean, they're similarly up against it. Isaac, when Abraham's going to kill him. I mean, we do have these examples of this heroic, extraordinary faith. Maybe Jacob when he's wrestling with God. I don't know. There's others. So Lawrence is not in the Bible. And it does, and there's other martyr stories like that aren't in the Bible, like Lawrence, that seem exaggerated or hard to swallow. But the Bible ones should not be, right? And I think that they do demonstrate to us that these extra biblical ones we don't have to apologize for him.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Anyway, so that kind of faith, Lawrence, if that story's true, he doesn't need the approval of those soldiers.
Yeah.
Right. He's confident in what God's given.
Mhm.
And it's not that he's proud of his baptism,
Mhm.
right? I mean, maybe, but it's that he just simply believes in it.
Yeah. That's what Paul talks about when he says, I boast in one thing.
Yeah.
Right. So I do boast, but what is it that he boasts in? He boasts in Christ.
That's right.
And there's that. So his boasting isn't something external.
Yeah.
And then that kind of frees him up.
Yeah. I really think he's embarrassed at that point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think that he gets forced into that by these misbehaving Corinthians, right? It's sort of like when your father says, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you, right? I really don't want to do this. I don't want to spank you, right? You think this is terrible, what you're going to have to endure this punishment, but actually it hurts the father, your human father, more than it hurts you because he doesn't want to be involved in this. You're kind of, you have stained him. You have dragged him into your sin. You're causing him to punish you in a way that's not what he wants to be a father for.
Yeah.
Right? That's what he means. I think Paul at that point, he's like, okay, fine. You're gonna force this issue, then I'm gonna tell you the stuff I've done, even though I'm embarrassed to be saying it, right? So he's boasting in all of that stuff, and then finally he comes down.
Yes.
And I think I think that's a similar thing when Paul has to defend his apostolos. How do you say that word?
Yeah, like
apostolic office
validity. Yeah.
That he's trying to prove he's an apostle. They're forcing him into this. I think we have to learn to do that, by the way. There's a kind of false humility, right? So, I mean, false humility is just pride. It just looks nicer.
Yeah.
Because, right, it's saying, what I don't want is I care about what you think. So I'm going to pretend to be humble so that you don't think that I'm proud.
Yeah.
Which is just pride, because I care what you think. And particularly, I mean, that's just sin. And it's maybe kind of more dangerous sin because it looks good. You can get away with it. But I think a similar sort of thing is to be embarrassed about your office, the authority your office has, right? You should not apologize to your children for telling them what to do, right? This is your job and you're supposed to do it, right? Pastors should not apologize to their congregations for exercising their authority, right?
Yeah.
Police officers, right on down.
And that's where I've stopped. I think early on I had this notion of like when someone says, good pastor or a good sermon pastor or something, to try to minimize that.
Yeah.
And then I realized that was really just an extension of pride. And I was trying to look humble, right? Rather than just saying, what sometimes a humble thing to do is just to accept the praise of somebody who's given it. Right.
Yeah.
And that's where pride is so, it's so difficult, right? Because then pride is something you have to reflect on, because then you have to say like, okay, well now how has that affected me?
Yeah.
Right. So it's something that you always are going to wrestle against, and it's not easy to pin down. I mean, one trick I always have is I'll say, okay, when I meet somebody new, what are the things that I try to bring up as quickly as possible? And then that's kind of the list of the things that I know I'm prideful for.
Yeah.
Right. And that's always it's because you're putting forth your resume.
Yep.
Right. So it's like you're talking to someone, they don't know anything about you. And how quickly do you have to be like, oh yeah, I love going to the gym, or you have to say like, oh, I'm a reader of big books, or you have to say, whatever it is, but like that's your self-identity that you pride yourself in, and you feel almost naked until you can feel valid in their eyes because they know those things.
Yeah.
And that's why I think they might still do it. There's a certain order for a conversation at lunch. There's a certain order within, it might be the Benedictines or something like that, but there's something where as they're training to be priests, one of the last things they have to do is they're given like $50 and they have to travel from like New York City down to wherever, like Texas.
Okay.
And they have to wear like kind of old clothes. And the whole point is like, you've got to go be a beggar and figure out how to get by on a beggar, like, so you can't hide behind any kind of like esteem or anything else. And you just have to kind of be submissive and rely on other people to provide for you, and I'm not advocating that we do that for our pastors, but like, it is good to just try to, like an easy thing you can do is like, as you meet new people, try not to impress them quickly.
Yes.
Just let that go, and then just maybe be interested in them or whatever. But that's just a good way to kind of try to wrench against your, kind of your bad habits where pride manifests.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And yeah, it's so true. Yeah. Why? And of course, it never works anyway. We never impress anybody.
No.
It's so dumb we're so dumb. Sin makes us so dumb. I always think this about cussing.
Yeah.
This is, people like, what is the point of these words, right? It's like to try to seem tough or to try to seem like I'm really passionate about this, whatever, like nobody has ever impressed or, oh boy, he's really mad about that light being red or what, it's ridiculous. It doesn't actually add any emphasis. Mm-hmm. But why would we feel like we need to add emphasis?
Yeah.
Right. Why do we need people to know how angry we are
mm-hmm.
or how happy we are? That we have to throw in these words.
Yeah.
It's so insane.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, like, yeah, this idea that pride's behind all of this really does make sense. And that it is the kind of counter. I also like the idea. I've come around on this idea of Lucifer being actually a description of the fall of Satan.
Tell me more.
That's the I don't know where that is in the Bible. It's in Isaiah
or something.
It's Isaiah, but I don't know. But right there, so there's this description of it's the king of Assyria, I think.
Oh, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so his sin is pride. It's named, and then he's going to be thrown down. And in the context, it's very clear this is a human king, right? That's being talked about. But because in Latin he's called the morning star, which is this Lucifer word. And then because it sounds like the description of what happened to the devil, right? Mm-hmm. And so then it became that's where this Lucifer name comes, and then this idea that this is a type or an allegory of the fall of the devil.
Mm.
Okay, so I never liked that because I'm a Missouri Synod guy. We got to go by the Bible. What's the Bible say? No speculation, all that stuff, right? Mm. And clearly that's not the context of it and the first meaning, but what I've come around to on this is, of course, that's it. It is what it says, right? It's about the king. At the same time, it makes total sense to me that the pride of a human king and his fall would actually follow the same pattern as the fall of the lead angel, and that God could maybe be telling us about more than one thing at once, and that there's nothing under the sun that's new.
Yeah.
Right.
The servant is about his master's business. Right?
Yeah. And so there's a consistency between them. And so to actually see this as potentially kind of hint, I've come around on that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever thought about that.
No, I haven't. But, the one thing I have reflected on with that was, that there is, because there's the point, is it in Deuteronomy 34, I think, where it's kind of reflecting back on the Tower of Babel.
Okay.
And it's saying that the people were kind of given over to their gods. Right. And I'm trying to remember the exact, but kind of the takeaway of that is that at some point the king, so you could take like Pharaoh, for instance. So you've got Pharaoh and then you've got Satan. So you've got maybe like Satan in the spiritual realm and then you've got Pharaoh in the physical realm. Right. So point being, as you go through Exodus, like there's kind of two slaveries that are at play.
Yeah.
There's the physical slavery where they're enslaved to Pharaoh, but then there's the spiritual slavery where the people are enslaved by sin. Right. Which is why the Exodus doesn't complete when they leave Egypt. Like they also need the 10 Commandments and they need the covenant and all of that. But then if you go back to Pharaoh, it's like Pharaoh and Satan are kind of two sides of one coin. Like Satan is like the spiritual captain, or it could be a demon or something. But like there's these gods that they worship that are demonic, and then there's the leaders that are I don't want to say demonic incarnate, but like they're humans who are embodying that which their master is about. Right. So like that kind of interchange very much works too with that Lucifer.
Yeah, it does.
Where it's like the king of Babylon is Satan's working through the king of Babylon. Yeah. So at some point they're almost indistinguishable.
Right.
In the same way, like we're to put on Christ, like we are to become very much like Christ because Christ is working in us. Right.
Yeah.
It kind of works that way in the inverse.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It was the, you got all that stuff about the idols, right?
Mm-hmm.
You become like that which you worship.
Yeah.
Right. So you become, unable to speak, incapable of seeing, incapable of hearing, just like the idols you worship, because you can't hear God's word, you can't see the truth, and you can't speak his praise.
Mm.
And I think that's again, a kind of similar reality. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How you become like the gods that you worship. Paul also, of course, he does name the false gods as actually demons.
Yeah.
And I like to, the whole demon thing is weird and a little scary, but I like to point out that while we certainly believe in demons,
mm-hmm.
Exactly how they're acting out in this world is is certainly ambiguous.
Mhm.
I mean, in the Gospels, you have very active demons that take possession of people and then are cast out by Jesus. There's none of that in the Old Testament.
Mhm.
It's not the way the demons are depicted as acting.
Yeah.
And then you have in Acts, both Paul and Peter have one exorcism. That's it. And then there's no other recordings of them. So it's definitely somehow tied to the Messianic kind of age. Seems like the other miracles, maybe. But whether there's demons, actually inhabiting people's bodies and controlling their arms, like they were, right, throwing them into the fire, talking through them, in the Gospels, the demons do have human agents, right? And I think that is we have to absolutely recognize that spiritual warfare is fought in the physical realm.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes when we get into this kind of, so to back to your point, this is, I think we're corresponding here, right? You're saying, Pharaoh is the agent of Satan, and Satan is fought not by sort of, sitting in your bedroom or kneeling down in your bedroom, folding your hands, squinting your eyes, and praying really hard. That could be part of it, but it's not simply done, kind of in the mind or with the will, but it's done in the world.
Yeah.
And we've got to recognize that. Otherwise, what if the demons aren't working through humans, whether they're controlling them, talking through them, and so forth? What are they doing? Just flying around. They don't have any bodies.
Yeah.
So they definitely work in this world through people. So
yeah.
So yeah, that kind of.
I've reflected on, like, if you want to see a demon, well, don't do this.
Yeah,
like, if you don't want to see a demon, so you also don't want to. But like, if you want to see a demon, pornography is that, because it's taking something that was meant to be beautiful and breaking and distorting it and making it as ugly as is possible. And that's exactly what a demon is. A demon is a high angel that, had beauty that would awe us to the point where we'd be tempted to fall down to our knees.
Right.
And yet what does it become? It's become that which is the distortion of what it once was. So that's,
I always tell everybody, I say pornography is a portal for demons.
Mm-hmm.
If you wouldn't play with a Ouija board, and you should not look at pornography. It's a more direct path. Similarly, anything that does away with our inhibitions, right? Alcohol, drugs, those sorts of things are, right? These are not things to be toyed with, right? If we believe, and we do, that demons are real and are looking for opportunities. The pastor that catechized me, his big thing with the demons was always, the church is a ship, right? An ark, right? So we're along, and the water is shark infested. And he says, you don't you don't jump overboard, but you also don't dangle your fingers in the water.
Yeah.
And I always loved that image, right? Like, you don't play with these things, right? Will it destroy you instantly and you'll lose your faith? Maybe not, but boy, it's risky. That shark might grab your hand and pull you in.
Yeah. And they know how to play the long game too.
That's it. Yeah. I don't like the screw tape letters because I find it too scary.
Yeah.
I have read it a couple of times, and it terrifies me.
Yeah.
Because I believe in that stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't, and it's uncomfortable to think about. I think we have to think about some uncomfortable things.
Yeah.
But of course, we shouldn't. Here's my other big thing on demons. I always want to point out that I think when it comes to demons, we usually go to the extremes. Either we make them into kind of cartoon figures, with forked tails and easily defeated, like Daniel Webster or Charlie Daniels, or right. Oh, we can outsmart the devil, easy. That's wrong. He'd love us to think that, right? Would you? Charlie Daniels beats the devil and gets the fiddle of gold. No, he doesn't. Right. As soon as you make the deal with the devil, you lost. Right. Charlie Daniels. Hopefully not literally, because he's a real person, but and then. The other side of it, though, is to think that the demons are all powerful. I don't see any reason in the Bible to think that demons can hear our silent thoughts.
I've heard that. Risto says that.
Oh, does he say that? Good. Because the demons aren't omniscient. I also don't see anything in the Bible to get the idea that, like, you sort of qualify what you said earlier, and we do this all the time. When we talk about Satan, it could just be some demon. Of course, we often just say Satan, and that's fine if we know what you mean. But Satan himself is a limited being. He can't be everywhere at once. He's not omnipresent. If Satan is attacking you here, then, I don't know how big he is. So, I don't know, maybe he could attack you here, and he could still attack somebody in Fort Wayne, 600 miles away or 500 miles away. But he is limited, right? Sometimes we exaggerate We make the demons too powerful.
Yeah. And same with angels, right? I mean, so the idea is there's I mean, who knows, but like there's got to be a lot, like there's a whole hierarchy, right? It's like a military at work,
yeah.
right? You might have
Legion, yeah.
You know, Patton might be over here, but he's got, you know, a chain of command, and so his decisions are being exercised, you know, 1,000 miles away. But what's the place where is it St. Michael who's off fighting
Daniel.
the king of Assyria?
Yeah, it's in Daniel.
Okay, so he's over there, and he got held up, and then, you know, so he's delayed on coming in. So there is this aspect where he's over there, so he can't be here.
That's right.
So
that is a weird scene. Yeah. There's a lot we don't know, isn't there?
Yeah, the Bible tells you what Wes Huff said this a lot, but you know, the Bible doesn't answer the questions that you want it to answer.
That's right.
You know, I mean, it does answer it answers the questions you should be asking, but it doesn't always answer the questions that you want it to just give you a clear answer on. Sometimes it just tells you, here's what's going on.
That's it. I love this. Is another great Luther story, or to me, it's a great Luther story where some boy asks Luther what God is doing before the creation of the world. Do you know this story?
No.
And Luther says he was making big sticks to hit impertinent boys. I've used that one many times.
Yeah.
It's usually the question. I've never been asked what was he doing before the creation of the world. It's usually something like, you know, can God make a rock so big he can't lift it?
Yeah.
That's like the favorite schoolboy. And then I'm like, he can make a rock big enough to drop on your head and send you to hell.
Yeah.
So knock it off.
That's the right question. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's either Lewis or Chesterton. It's like, you know, dumb questions don't stop being dumb questions just because you throw in the word God. You know, it's like,
nice.
You know, it's like,
I'm going to use that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to just speak in defense of, or against the idea that there are no dumb questions.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. That's an annoying teacherism that should have never been started.
Mm-hmm.
There are dumb questions.
Yeah.
Impious questions. Right.
Yeah.
Others. Yeah.
Ill-intentioned questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Right.
Well,
or questions you should be ashamed you don't know the answer of.
Yeah.
Even. But those do need to be asked in humility.
Yeah.
So that you could learn.
Yeah. So let's jump to envy.
Yeah.
Which is, so envy, I mean, envy is so close to pride. I mean, I think they call it the daughter of pride. Right. So it just kind of, it extends from, but the big thing about envy, I've heard it put this way. So envy is rejoicing when your neighbor fails and mourning when your neighbor succeeds.
Right.
Right. So it's always this aspect of it's competitive, which is going to, you know, flow very directly from pride. And discontentment is going to be within that as well. Right.
Yeah.
So kind of competition and discontentment. Do you want to add other things about what you see with envy?
I like to call it, envy is sadness at someone else's happiness.
Ooh, that's a good way to put it.
So if you think of, like, I love Schadenfreude is a great word. I don't love Schadenfreude, but I'm very familiar with it. Mm-hmm. Schadenfreude is this German word that's now in English that means you are happy at someone's sadness. Right? So Schade, sadness in German, Freude, happiness or joy. So you have, you know, so Bennett, you know, gets a promotion and I'm sad because something good happened to him. That's envy, right? Bennett falls down and smacks his head on the ground, and I'm happy because, you know, he's hurting. That's Schadenfreude. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So this idea that somebody else's goodness or somebody else's happiness would make me sad, right? And that's different than jealousy. Is another sort of concept that, right? So jealousy, I am a jealous God. So jealousy is usually defended by people that talk about these things. As being maybe not exactly a virtue, but at least a legitimate response to the world, that is to guard the things that you're supposed to guard. And I think that's helpful. Sometimes I do use the word jealousy in kind of the common sense where it really means envy, but.
Yeah, because isn't there, I think you just said it right, but envy is covetousness.
Covetousness.
Right. So, I mean, you're getting at the 9th and 10th commandment. So it's geared towards that. Oh, and remind me, I've got a thought here I want to throw at you. So that's envy. So envy is always about something that God has not given to you,
right? That
you think that you deserve, and it's usually, of course, going to be something that somebody else has,
or you just don't want them to have it at all.
Yeah. So there's that, but then jealousy is protecting that which God has given to you, right? So God is jealous of His people because He doesn't want His people to go astray, right? I can be jealous of my wife, and that I don't want my wife to be with another man, you know, because there's we have a covenant relationship. She's not supposed to do that. So jealousy is about protecting that which you're supposed to protect. Right. And then envy is about, obtaining that which God has not given to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then one other thought is just with envy is, I just lost it. We'll see if it comes back. I'll throw at you the thing that I was thinking about. So I heard this with lust. Okay, so with not with the sixth commandment, but when Jesus says, anyone who looks at a woman with lust, or with what's another translation for that, with something intent?
I don't remember.
Okay, but at least a man that looks at another woman with lust has already committed adultery.
Right.
And I heard a couple of people commenting on this, and it made a lot of sense, and I liked it, which doesn't mean it's true. So you tell me. So, but they were making the point that this lust that's being talked about, and the word that's used there is actually the same Septuagint word for covet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's actually more connected to the 9th and 10th commandment than the 6th commandment. Gotcha. And of course, none of these things are completely disconnected.
Right.
But the takeaway and the important point that they made was that this lust is less so about, like, you're walking down the street and you're minding your own business, and you kind of, beautiful woman walks by and you kind of look up and you're like, oh, and then you kind of catch yourself. It's not so much that Jesus is saying you have sinned to the same degree as someone who has committed adultery. But kind of the test for this lust, kind of the same thing with the coveting, is if circumstances were different and you actually had the opportunity to commit adultery, right? That would be kind of that coveting, right? Like, I might covet something, but I can't take my neighbor's car. Like, I might really want his big truck, but,
gotcha.
But like, realistically, like, I can't. I know I'm going to get arrested. I'm going to tick everyone off, so I just don't do it. But then the idea is, if all of those repercussions were removed, would you actually go take the truck?
Oh.
And if you would, you're not off the hook just because circumstances, like, right? So it's like, yes, like, you're like, well, this world leader did mass genocide. I didn't do mass genocide. And the question is, okay, well, if you were in that same situation and you were given that same degree of power, which you don't have, and you were able to get away with it, would you? And the whole point is, if that's the case, if that's really the orientation of your heart, you're not off the hook just because circumstances didn't allow you to sin. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I did like that because this is the reason I liked it, because that's tangible. Like, I can actually reflect on that. Like, I can say,
right.
Okay, right. So like, maybe I looked longingly at this person, and then you say, okay, would I have actually acted on that if the circumstances were? And then that really causes you to reflect on that. Versus, like, as a guy, you just can't help, like, glancing in a direction, right? So it's like, once that becomes the all-encompassing sin of adultery, then it's like, okay, well, I don't know, like, at that point, like, how do I stop from ever glancing at anybody, right? And does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're off the hook for glancing.
No, and that's not the point.
But, right,
yeah,
right. But I
it's
do
not
think
dismissing, but to say there's this.
There is a distinction.
There's a more dangerous thing that I can fall into.
Yeah, there's a gravity to the sin.
Yeah.
Right. So so this is there's a couple of things. First of all, St. Paul says covetousness is idolatry, which is really interesting. So he ties the first commandment and the 9th and 10th commandments directly together, and there is this reality that every sin has coveting behind it, dissatisfaction, right? And there's a gravity to sin. So the other thing, couple of things here, that sometimes, because all sins are equal in the sense that all sins deserve damnation, right? So it doesn't, the wages of sin is death. How many sins? Any. Number of sins. How big a sins? Any size, right? But at the same time, there is a gravity to sins, right? And of course, to covet your neighbor's wife in your heart but not act on it is not as grave as coveting your neighbor's wife and acting on it, right? Because you've brought more people into it. It's gone out into the world. I mean, they're not the same in the damage that they do to your soul or to the world, right? So all of those kinds of things. But there is this St. Paul line that coveting is idolatry. So simply lust, right? I mean, I don't want to be overly graphic here, but I'll be a little graphic. I mean, to wake up in the middle of the night aroused, right? And then to feel a kind of urge of passion, for your own wife who's asleep is not an endearing quality, right? Where the thoughts that go through your mind, could I wake her up? Should I wake her up? This kind of thing, right? That could be lust that's inappropriate, that's not considerate, that's not love, that's not, right, that's self-serving. That is a different. So, I mean, if we're trying to kind of isolate lust away from coveting, is what that's the point of that little exercise. Could you have lost that? Right. My wife has been given to me. And so that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
With the big point of kind of this, that there's this kind of gravity, right? Because the way it can be improperly used, right, is when someone's like, okay, so lust is the same as adultery. Well, I don't know. I glance at girls, like at some point, like, well, I'm already in the water.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, so what's the difference? Like if I committed adultery or if I obsess over this woman, like it doesn't matter. I'm already committed adultery because he says that lust is adultery, and I've glanced in this direction to where it's like, well, no, there is this kind of gravity to where, okay, you glanced. Now stop yourself and don't glance again, and also don't then go home and obsess over like so and so because you're breeding, you're moving towards it. Yeah.
Well, what I was getting to where you might be able to have lust with limited coveting at least, right? But if you're in your argument of sort of when Jesus says, right, what you've done here is of a degree that's worse because you've actually desired, if it's coveting and not just physical lust, you've actually desired something that belongs to someone else for your own selfish use. And you have created this kind of anger and hatred in your heart against the person to whom it belongs.
Yeah.
So if you go back to this envy thing, right, sadness at someone else's happiness, that's such an incredibly petty, like, why am I sad? Bennett got the promotion. It doesn't hurt me, doesn't cost me anything, doesn't do anything to me. It just makes me sad because I don't want him to be happy.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about that, how terrible that is.
Yes.
We've all done it, right? With Bennett, maybe even. I don't know. But the right there is this just like incredible pettiness that I've often said, like, I think envy is the stupidest sin in a way. And in a similar way, I think I never thought about tying envy to covet. I mean, in a way, but it is sort of interesting how dangerous it is. I also think another thing I wanted to bring up, I don't know if you thought of the other point, but I think envy is actually the primary sin within the church, especially within the ministry. Yeah, I think it's the thing that destroys team ministry the fastest. It's the number one danger to team. So what I mean by team ministry, of course, but that's usually the way we talk about congregations that have more than just a pastor. So if you have multiple pastors, or you have a staff, you have other people working full time or in ministry, it's very difficult. Well, it's impossible in this human world to not enter into kind of competition in your own mind, right? Who likes him better? Who goes to his Bible study? All of those kinds of things. Yeah. And it's just the worst, right? And it has, I think, for team ministry to be successful, it's the thing that has to be named on almost a daily basis. That and how is it overcome? Like, what is the virtue? I think the virtue again here is at least one of them is again gratitude. Right? That you have to learn to see, you have to recognize the other person's call and authority and goodness, and then you have to thank God for it. Right? You have to go like, he did good. The people loved him for it. They praised him for it. This is a good that I'm going to praise God for and him. Yeah. Right? And the other thing that I think has to kind of come along, this is a sort of leadership-y thing, but I think it's so important and so Paul says, right, for fathers to not provoke their children. I love that, to anger. It's such an interesting thing. So how do you handle your subordinates, whether you're a father talking to children or you're, pastors working together or you're a boss or whatever, right? I think the way that we are provoked to anger for the most part is actually micromanaging. And it is this, so it's frustrating, right? You tell the other or whatever, the other pastor is supposed to do something and then he does it, but he doesn't do it the same way you would have done. So first of all, you got pride again. You think your way's better. We always do. We always think our own ideas are the best. I mean, it's just, that's our flesh, right? So pride gets in there. And then there's this kind of annoyance that he didn't do it well enough, which is, again, kind of pride. There has to be this kind of, this is going to sound really terrible, but I think we have to learn to live with is good enough, right? What you have to say is like, look, I can't do this stuff all by myself. That's why we have this staff. He needs to do it. I need him to do it. I'm glad he's doing it because I can't do everything. And I have to accept that it's good enough. Now, it's hard to sort of put into practice, of course, and it's hard to maybe comprehend. I think it helps, again, if you go to fathers and sons.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about your 7-year-old, you tell him, make your bed, right? You're not expecting him to, do a military, Marine Corps bed. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Bounce a quarter on the bed, right? He's a 7-year-old. If he pulls the sheets and blankets into basically the right position and the pillows at the right end of the bed, that's good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I don't mean that we should be condescending to our colleagues, right? But I think we do have to recognize that I told him to make his bed, he made the bed. I told him to teach that Bible class, he taught that Bible class. And I don't mean to say that, there was no false doctrine and that's the only standard.
Mm-hmm.
But, he did it his own way. It got done. God used it. It was good enough. And I'm letting go
mm-hmm.
of kind of my pride and my thinking that I got to do everything. And right?
Yeah. I think that's good. Maybe two other thoughts. I mean, one, I think it's helpful. And I think you guys probably do this from what I understand. But I think it's also good when you have pastors that are doing different things.
That does help. Yeah.
And Pastor Duncan, I think, has been very, very good at that. And we're at a bigger church. This happens naturally. So there's a lot of different things going on. But like for the most part, preaching and teaching, we overlap. But other than that, we're doing kind of completely different things. Right. And he basically says, well, those are your things. And I say, well, those are your things. And in that way, it's not like we're in the same meeting trying to accomplish the same things and then trying to like talk over each other to see like, who's the big person in the room kind of a thing, right? Which is always a sinful temptation. And, I've seen that at churches where it's like you've got a senior and an associate and they basically do the same things and they go to the exact same meetings. And it's like, and then at that point you just have kind of a mini me type thing. And that's going to naturally create that extra competition.
Right.
Versus saying, these are your things and these are my things. And there is a chain of command. Duncan is the senior pastor here.
Yep.
And I very much respect that the buck stops with you on things. So lots of times I take a consultant role where I'm like, here's my thoughts on it. Like you've got the burden of making the decision. So I'm going to, advocate for this. And in the end you can,
right.
agree or disagree. And I understand that that's your call, but yeah, dividing is, I think, helpful.
Dividing helps. Yeah. And I think it's very helpful if each person can sort of at least have some area where he just gets to run it completely without any interference, or for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
I think, there was something else there you said that I thought was good. That's helpful. The, the kind of the buck stops here thing, you have to also, I think, again, that sort of good enough thing is you have to also allow him some autonomy to make changes.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the sort of provoking your children to anger thing. So I can think of examples where, we're working together. We agree and he's hesitant, right? So I say, I think we should handle it this way. He says, I don't think we should, it's too harsh or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, no, we got to do it this way. And I talk him into it basically. And it just kind of comes, we don't really completely agree, but he says, just like, you're the senior, you make the decision. I'll do what you say. That's the call. I understand. So then he goes off to do it. Well, then he gets there and he can't do it
mm-hmm.
because he doesn't really believe in it. He didn't agree with it, or because circumstances are a little bit different when he gets there than he thought. And then he does it differently than I said. Then he comes back and tells me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now what, right? Well, look, I sent him to do it. Once you send him, like you issue the command, I mean, in terms of kind of military stuff, you issue the command, he's got to carry it out. He's got to have the freedom, the autonomy to respond to the situation on the ground according to his own conscience. Now, I mean, he should try to do what you agree. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So I think, again, like husbands and wives. So like the common fighting point of Christian husbands and wives, in my experience, is children, disciplining children. This is worse than finances. I think. Yeah. I don't think that's, I don't know. Maybe
I
right.
think you're onto something. Yeah.
So how do you discipline children? And I'll just stereotypically.
We have 4 kids, 5 and under.
It's hard. Yeah. So stereotypically, and we have not talked about this in advance.
Yeah.
If I nail this too pointedly, it's just luck, right?
Yeah.
Stereotypically, the man wants to be harder, the wife's softer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's biblical because her gift is in nurture, right? That's her call primarily. And, your call is in headship and leadership, and that's how it usually goes. I think actually you need the wife because I think if we didn't have wives, we would be too harsh.
Mm-hmm.
They actually have a lot of wisdom to bring in. So the sort of story is, whatever, that, okay, the kid's got to make his bed. but you got to go off to work. She's got to actually carry it out.
Mm.
So you agree to something, right? You fight about it for a while, because you come home and she's mad the kid didn't do it. And then you like, well, I think, we shouldn't give him any food or water for 3 days. Okay, that's a little harsh, right? Probably not the appropriate response. Okay, so she calms you down, right? You kind of finally come to some agreement. Okay, no breakfast. He doesn't make his bed. He can't have breakfast. She's got to go off to school. That'll teach him, right? He's not going to die. He's not going to be hurt by it. There's no threat. He needs to suffer a little bit. There needs to be a consequence. I'm tired of coming home and you complaining about this. I want it fixed, right? So she reluctantly agrees. Okay, fine, right? The next day, he goes off to work. Kid doesn't make the bed. She comes home. What happened? He didn't make his bed. Did you give him breakfast? Yeah. Now, right away, the husband is tempted to be angry. She's been disobedient, all this kind of stuff. Well, wait a minute, right? You got to calm down. You got to find out. Well, why? Well, today's the SAT. I didn't want to sabotage. Today's got a game. I didn't want to sabotage it, right? He needed to do this. I know we said we were going to do this, but it didn't seem like it was the right moment, and so forth. Okay, tomorrow, right? So she carried it out. She had an excuse. You accept it, right? What if it happens again? Happens again. At some point, you have to kind of also be able. So there's sort of like she has to be able to respond. Could be legit. You should give her the benefit of the doubt, right? But there also could come a point. She's not capable of carrying this out. It requires a kind of intestinal fortitude that she does not have because she's a woman. Or maybe not. It could be the other way. It's not completely male-female. But at some point, then what do you do? Well, you can't beat her. You can't make her go. You don't have that kind of authority. You can't coerce your wife that way, right? That's not leadership right? The wife's word is hupatasso, not hupakuo. In Ephesians 5, hupatasso is subordinate, under orders. It's a military term. Hupakuo, for the children in Ephesians 6, is obey. The different word Paul uses.
Okay.
The relationship's different. You don't treat your wife like a child. You can't beat her. You can't take away her breakfast.
Yeah.
You don't have that kind of, right? That's not the relationship. So what do? She can't do it. She's not going to do it. She keeps making excuses. She's not being willfully, right? She's not lying to you. But you got to be able to figure this out. Well, now what do? Well, maybe you got to stay home. You got to stay home from work that morning and make him make his bed and not let him have breakfast. Or maybe you got to make him get up at 4:00 when you get up and make his bed. I mean, you got to figure out a way to do, right, what needs to be done if she can't carry it out.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that, I don't know.
There's this aspect of if you're willing to do the orders, you also have to be willing to
carry it out. And you got to recognize, right, if it's a child, there is coercion. If it's a wife, there isn't. Right. And so all of these things kind of, I don't know how we got off on that. Oh, envy. So this go back to the associate pastor thing, right? Again, there's this, how do you sort of deal with these things? They are difficult and they are dicey, and it's usually not quite that clear, right? So it's most interesting kind of when things go wrong in a way, or I mean, it's kind of most revealing. I think that, again, this has to be learning how to let go. So I do think this is still pride and kind of envy. When your wife doesn't carry out the order, it's a hit to your pride.
Yeah.
And so the way you respond to it is telling, because the problem there is you have to take accountability. So I gave the order, the kid doesn't make the bed, no breakfast, and then it wasn't carried out. And my temptation is to feel like that's my ego, right? And I'm being disrespected. But what I actually have to figure out is, why didn't she carry it out? It's my fault she didn't carry it out. Is it because it was an unrealistic order? Is it because she doesn't have the kind of ability to carry this out? Or is it because it is actually too harsh and she doesn't, and because of the way I've treated her, she's afraid to tell me, right? And then I have to respond appropriately. But if it's my job to lead, then any failures fall on me.
Yeah.
And I would say the same kind of thing again, like, and this is just so lacking, I think, often, because it's so hard, right? You tell the associate pastor to do this, he doesn't do it. That's not, I mean, it is his fault too, but it's also your fault. And you got to figure out where it went wrong. And the temptation is to put all the blame on him.
Yeah, the survival rate for team ministry is not great.
No. So it's got to be, it's a lot of talking.
Yeah, which, I mean, so my father,
he's been there long.
Yeah, there were 3 pastors there for 25 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah, worked together. And Yeah, it went well. And I think a lot of that was, props to Pastor Shoemaker, who, I think that was his gift. Yeah, and certainly all three, they worked together well. But, it took a certain degree of humility
and talking about feelings.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. My dad never came home and talked about it.
No, he didn't. No, but I think you got to talk about feelings within the.
Well, that's right. Yeah, he didn't come home and say, we were talking about our feelings today.
I hate it. I don't ever talk about my feelings, but you have to.
Yeah.
And marriages go wrong when they don't talk.
Yeah.
And marriages fail not under the 6th commandment, but under the 8th commandment.
I've heard you speak on this.
Yeah, it's really, I think that's really key.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say
never to speak ill of your spouse.
Right. And to be speaking to her all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Marriage lives in conversation. And I think all of these kinds of things require a lot of talking and a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just, the flesh is just so weak.
Yeah.
So,
well, I can see that. So that reminds me of the thought I had on envy before. There is this aspect of, for envy to work, you have to hyper disconnect yourself from the other, right? So if you have the notion of like, we are the body, right? So therefore we work together. There's this aspect. Well, I mean, Paul talks that way, right? It's like, what person would cut off his hand, right? And they, would harm his own body, right? And like, I wouldn't cut off my hand because my hand is a part of me, right? So like, what person would harm his wife, with word or deed, right? That which the first step is your wife has to all of a sudden, you have to remove her from the one flesh union, right? So you have to make her so distinct from you that you feel that that she could be an enemy, to whereas like my hand can't be my enemy, it's part of me, and then act in accordance. But then envy is going to do that with everybody.
Yeah.
Right. So like if I'm envious of you because you've got more hair than I'm going to have at your age, I'm pretty positive of that, right? But like at
probably
some
in
point,
more places too.
Yeah, but I've got to like hype. But I have to hyper disconnect you from myself to be like, I would want that from him, or I'm unhappy that he, that this is going well for him. So there's that aspect of removing yourself and kind of the separation of that, which is supposed to be much more interconnected, right?
Yeah. And so I think envy is so bad in the church because, again, it's like, it's so inappropriate, right? And it happens so quietly.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's so deadly. You can sort of get away with it. You can sort of, it doesn't necessarily act out. It's just sort of, yeah.
Let's move. You want to move to wrath?
Yeah, sure.
So from what I understand, from wrath, I think maybe a good way of going about wrath would be, Bennett, can you look up what the theological virtue is that corresponds with wrath? I'm trying to remember what that is.
Temperate, maybe self-controlled. I don't know. That's not a.
Yeah, he would have talked about that too. But a good way to maybe categorize wrath is there's wrath and then kind of anger. Anger is going to be different from wrath, or we could maybe be more distinct and say like kind of righteous anger, right? So God is slow to anger, right? He's not no anger. He's also not blow anger, but he's kind of appropriate anger.
Right.
What is it? Be angry and do not sin.
Right.
So there's this aspect of a lot of sin, I think, has been committed because we don't understand that anger actually has a place, right? And the way I've heard anger described is anger is, what is it? It's kind of, in some ways it can be love in motion, but it's like anger is always an action that protects something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So God's anger is always poured out in protection of that which he loves. Right. And so good anger is always done in that way. Like if someone's going to harm my child, I need to act against that. And that's where I forget, there's some church father had this, might have been Chrysostom, that had, I think it is Chrysostom. He has this quote where he says, the lack of anger has been the hotbed of many vices.
Yeah.
Right. So there's this aspect to where like, as vices are rising up in people's lives, we should, like, you should be angry against those things because, so what is the drunkard in my son? My son's not a drunkard. He's 4 years old. But like, if the drunkardness is rising up in my son, a big sin would be if I'm not angry at that drunkardness. Because if I'm not angry at the drunkardness in him, that means I do not really love him. If I love him, that which is harming him, I must be opposed to, right? So that's anger. So as long as we remember that anger is always protecting something.
Okay.
Right. So then when you move to wrath, you say, okay, well, when does anger become this wrath and this deadly sin? And remember the mountain, right? So it's always like you've got like everything is always going to move from pride. Well, then wrath is always what are you protecting? You're protecting yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And you're protecting. So like the one, I remember listening to a Bible study on this years ago and then reflecting on it. And I was driving in a car and I was on the way to an appointment. And there was this driver in front of me that was just driving hyper slow, like 10 under the speed limit. And then we missed this light. And I remember I was just so ticked off, and I didn't like yell at the car or, anything like that. But I was so angry, and I had just been doing this Bible study, and I was like, so what's going on here? I said, okay, well, what's going on? I'm already running late to an appointment, and it's the appointment that it's the kind of appointment where I want to be on time because I want this person to think that I'm the kind of person that has it together and shows up on time. So why am I angry at this person in front of me? It's not really even directed at them. What am I protecting? I'm protecting my own kind of, Brian's got it put together type image that I have of myself. So my wrath is now an expression of protecting myself.
Yeah.
To whereas kind of righteous anger is always the appropriate action towards that which harms people that you're supposed to be protecting. So again, it's other oriented versus self-centeredness.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I don't know a lot. I've not thought much about wrath. I don't know if it's related to the Greek idea of outrage, where you have outrages that are done, like to Hector's body. And I don't know, but I don't know if there's
because Achilles. That's right. Achilles is if you wanted to pick a figure for the deadly sin, it's Achilles.
Is it
for wrath?
Oh, there you go, and probably because of what he does to Hector's body, right? And his desire for vengeance and. Yeah, and of course, again, Achilles' problem is pride. Mm-hmm. Hubris is the big problem for everybody.
Yeah.
In the Homeric world. So
I'm trying to remember, Bennett. Do you remember any big takeaways? So Christian Preuss, for his lit course, he covered the story of Achilles. It was really interesting. But he did talk about that with the wrath. If I remember right, I think in Dante's in Purgatory, I think that the people with wrath are blindfolded. Is that? Can you look that up and see if that's true?
That sounds right.
Because I think in that one, like pride, they're very much like they're hunched over.
Okay.
So they can't see up. And then I'm pretty sure that's something to do with the eyes, or it might be a fog that's there. And the point is, when wrath comes, you can't see straight.
It makes you insane.
Right? When you see red, we use that phrase a lot because it just it just blinds you. You can't see the other person properly. You can't see the situation properly, and you can't see yourself properly, right? So it makes you completely blind.
I mean, I always think about the passage, right? Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord.
Mm.
I sort of live in this the Bible and the classical world. Mm-hmm. That's where I live in my mind. So when Achilles cannot overcome Afghanistan, he ends up just marrying some daughter of some chieftain and finally just moves through it. It's the only place he doesn't really conquer it. So then that way he's able to move. And the reason he can't conquer Afghanistan is probably related to the reason the United States couldn't conquer our Soviet Union. It's a tribal deal, and they have personal vengeance rather than a justice system. So what that means is, if your brother comes to my house to help me put a roof on my house and he falls off the roof and dies, then you come and you say, well, that's your fault. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. And maybe it was negligence on my part and I didn't protect your brother's life like I should have, but it doesn't matter. You don't investigate. You just hold me responsible, but your brother is worth more than my brother's. So of course you have to kill two of my brothers to get even, right? And then now I have to, right? And so this is the way tribal it never ends, right? It's impossible to sort of rule these people or to conquer these people because of this. And you have this kind of great thing in the giving of the law in the Old Testament, right? And when God says, vengeance is mine, right? That we can actually have a code, a law, and there can actually be justice. And it's kind of outside of us. So that's really important for civilized people. But from a theological point of view, I think this is really astounding, right? Vengeance is mine. And then Jesus says, turn the other cheek, right? That we actually, as people of faith, are not called upon to enact vengeance. Vengeance is always an act of pride, right? We do care about justice.
Yes.
But that's way different than vengeance. But we, at the same time, we do expect, right? We do expect actually that God will avenge us, right? And of course, Job hopes for that. And others. I think that's somehow related.
100%. Bennett, can you look up Miroslav Mirosl, I think it's AF, Miroslav Volf, so Volf. And it's a quote, and within the quote is, it takes the comfort of a suburban home. There should be a nice quote there. You can put on vengeance. It's a really good quote on this. Because I think he's Croatian, so he dealt with this tribal battle for a while, and he's dealing with the importance of judgment.
Oh, good.
As you look that up, there was another thought left again. This is the post-lunch interviews. Are you able to find it?
Well, I know. Well, while he's doing that, I'll tell you another thing with this wrath thing. I think so. The blind thing's interesting. I think the other thing, I always think about the Incredible Hulk.
Mm-hmm.
So we all love the Incredible Hulk because we get so angry as boys. We felt like this anger ought to make us strong.
Mm-hmm.
It's the total adolescent fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
except that like a boxer in the real world, right? The Hulk's a fantasy, but boxers get angry, they lose. Right.
Maybe click that top one with Brent. But yeah.
So I think that there's this kind of fantasy that anger is strong, but it's actually weak.
All right. Go down a little bit. Yep. Okay. So this is a pretty long one, but this is the correct one. So he says, my thesis that the practice of non-violence requires a belief in divine vengeance will be unpopular with many Christians. I'm going to read this whole one. It's pretty good. Especially theologians in the West. To the person who is inclined to dismiss it, I suggest imagining that you are delivering a lecture in a war zone, which is where a paper that underlines this chapter was originally delivered. Among your listeners are people whose cities and villages have been first plundered, then burned and leveled to the ground, whose daughters and sisters have been raped, whose fathers and brothers have had their throats slit. The topic of the lecture, a Christian attitude toward violence. The thesis, we should not retaliate since God is perfect non-coercive love. Soon you would discover that it takes the quiet of a suburban home for the birth of the thesis that human non-violence corresponds to God's refusal to judge. In a scorched land soaked in the blood of the innocent, it will invariably die. And as one watches it die, one will do well to reflect about many other pleasant captivities of the liberal mind. Isn't that good?
Wow.
So is his point right? I mean, he's talking about the necessity of our understanding of hell, that there is like an actual judgment.
Yeah.
And this idea that it's like, well, no, you just have to learn to love. It's like, well, that doesn't work because these real atrocities happened and therefore we have to remedy them. And the only way that you can kind of get over this back and forth, which he experienced firsthand, is you have to have this understanding that vengeance is mine, says the Lord, and that there is a real vengeance and that wrong things will actually be properly judged. Right. And then, of course, I mean, you plug in, also the Christian understanding of forgiveness there.
Of course.
And that that those who are willing to repent and submit, that those sins are then, placed upon Christ.
Right.
But that's also not just like a flippant type thing.
Right.
It's like, well, God forgives all people. So like, da-da-da-da. It's like, no, like true repentance can bring about true reconciliation. But just this idea of just like learn to get along. It's like, that doesn't work. Right.
No. Well, it also, then why did Jesus have to die?
Yeah.
Right. This idea that there's no wrath in God, no righteous wrath. That is what's visited upon the Son and what needs to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's the fulfillment of prophecy. Eat of this tree and you will die.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the one that dies.
Yeah.
And he's got to make that payment,
mm-hmm.
So not just for our sins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe a couple other thoughts on wrath. We move on. One, if you were to probably pick a biblical figure, maybe Cain.
Yeah.
Is a good example. And you notice he's completely blinded to the situation.
Yeah.
There's the warning, sin is crouch. I love this. One of my favorite lines on sin, right? That sin is crouching at the door and its desire is to have you, right? It's almost like a little leopard in the field, right? Where it's like it's like subtle, but then when it pounces, it's going to be, absolutely bloody.
And that comes out of envy too, right?
Yes.
Cain,
yeah.
That's, very much.
Yeah. You can see how all these are kind of like
interconnected.
Interconnected. Yeah. Anything else you want to say on wrath, or should we move on to Agnus?
No, but just that sort of sin begets sin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. You can't really do one of these in isolation.
Yeah. Yeah. You certainly can't be, if you're really completely other oriented, then one, if you're really completely, if you're other oriented, you can't, one, not have righteous anger because you have to want to protect that, which you love. But then two, you can't have wrath in defense of yourself. That's, that's inappropriate or, not calibrated correctly. So avarice, which is greed. Let's take a quick break and then we'll jump into these last ones. All right. And we're back, which means we got sloth next. We'll just call it sloth.
Oh, did we do avarice?
Oh, no, we didn't do avarice. Yeah.
That was kind of slothful of you.
Yeah. Maybe it was a Freudian slip, right? So avarice, which is greed.
Okay.
So yeah, you want to introduce kind of the sin of greed and how that manifests?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think of we have some real examples of this in the New Testament, right? I mean, the Pharisees, they're lovers of money. And then we have the rich young ruler. And then we have, of course, the dives, if that's a parable, but the rich man and Lazarus.
Oh, yeah.
So this definitely is a big New Testament topic. And then Paul, of course, the love of money is the root of all evil. So, I mean, I think it's I don't know. I'm probably missing some nuances. Yeah. I mean, the difference between greed and gluttony, or avarice and gluttony. Is avarice always kind of money and material things, and gluttony pleasure?
Yeah, I think so. I think
so too, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. How to? So I would say, well, I've heard this about gluttony, that gluttony is trying to shove the whole world in your mouth, or well, we'll kind of save some of that when we get to gluttony. But yeah, it seems like, well, here's kind of the one practical thing maybe that I get out of greed. So what does Christ say? He says, when he's talking about the eye, he says, where your treasure is, there your heart is also. And that's been a good kind of reflection on. I found that reflecting on greed is a good way to reflect on what are the false idols in your life.
Yeah.
So if you say, it's kind of a good way to go idol hunting. Right. So you say, okay, we all have kind of idols. Then you can say, okay, well, what are my idols? And then you kind of reflect. And sometimes it's just tough to kind of figure those out. But a good test that I've heard, building off that Matthew 5, I think it's Matthew 5, where he says where the treasure is, there your heart is also, is I'll say, okay, what things are very easy for me to spend money on? Because like some things you're just like, I don't want to buy that thing. And then there's other things where you're just like, yep, like here you go, when you throw money at those things. And that's probably that will show you, where your treasure is. That's going to show you what your heart is.
Yeah.
Right. So that's been a good reflection point for me.
Yeah. I've often said in sermons, right, we can tell what you believe in by looking at your checkbook register, right? Where do you spend your money? Right? What do you love? And I mean, it sounds like sort of harsh Jonathan Edwards level stuff, but if you spend more money on a cup of coffee than you do in the offering plate, then we know what you love. Yeah. I thought you were going to go someplace a little bit different there with the, I'm really ashamed of myself how much time I spend sort of daydreaming and fantasizing about money. And it's very easy to sort of feel kind of altruistic and, the school needs more money. The church needs more money. Here's what I'd do if I had Bill Gates gave me $100 million. I'd fund the seminary, and I'd fund foreign missions, and I'd fund this, and I'd put an endowment, right? As though, and I think that's the idol for me, right? I mean, the money itself is an idol because I believe money has power in my fallen flesh. And I think money would make life easier. Andy Crouch, do you know who that is? He was I don't know what he is now. He was, I don't think he is anymore, the editor of Christianity Today. And he wrote a book that I read about technology. I'm a big or kind of digital minimalist kind of guy, or want to be. And so he wrote a very good book about this. I can't remember what it's called, but he talked about money in a way that I found helpful. Money distances us from people. He tells this great story that we can all relate to, but it's his story. He talks about when he was in college, he gets his first job. He has to move out of this apartment. It's on the 3rd floor. They got to carry a couch down this like spiral staircase, an outdoor kind of staircase. And in order to get it done, he's just newly married. His friends come over and they painstakingly get the stuff out and onto this U-Haul. And afterwards they have beer and pizza, and it was kind of a horrible hot day. But at the end, it's kind of great fun sitting around drinking beer and laughing and carrying on. 15 years later, he moves again across the country because of a new job, and he has money and he hires movers, and there's no memories. And so money actually kind of takes away our dependence upon other people, our need for them. So, and I thought that was very insightful, right? Why do we want money? And it's often because we don't want to have to deal with people. Yeah. We don't. There's a good picture of that in George MacDonald's Lilith.
and which is kind of I don't think it's formal allegory, but it's kind of along like the Great Divorce or Dante, right? So it's this, kind of fictional story that's, portraying theological truths. So really good. George MacDonald might be one of the, he was one of the biggest inspirations on Lewis,
right?
When it came to story writing. That's a really good book. But there's kind of this wicked city towards the end that they go to, and that's where kind of Lilith, who's kind of, in mythology, she's, mythologically speaking, demon woman, Adam's first wife, this kind of a thing, right? So there's a mythology there that, isn't historically accurate. We wouldn't find that in the Bible per se. They take one verse and they kind of run with it. Point being, that's who Lilith is. So she's kind of like this feminine version of Satan.
Right.
Right. And then the city is very wicked and it's very wealthy and no one's in the streets because everyone is just in their houses.
Oh.
Right. And they use their money to just kind of protect themselves and stay alienated. And I've definitely heard that ascribed to suburbanism.
Yeah.
Which is really true. And I'm a suburbanite, and we've got some good neighbors and whatnot. But there's this aspect where I've never asked a neighbor for like a cup of sugar, which is kind of an old thing. And it's like, well, and some of it might extend from pride too, but it's like, well, I've got the money to buy sugar. Like, why would I need to rely on a neighbor? And it is nice. Like I've got a guy, he's actually our head elder, and we do yard work stuff together. So he's a big yard enthusiast. And, my thesis is that white collar people are big on their yards because I can't fix anything else. So it's like the one thing I can manage is like trying to like get rid of weeds or like cut my lawn. So we do stuff, but he's got certain things and he'll just let me borrow it. And then I've got an edger that he doesn't have. So like, he comes and borrows that. So it's nice. And it creates, once again, camaraderie.
Yeah.
Now, like if I was a little more well off, I don't know, like I might just pay someone to take care of my yard.
Right.
Exactly. So there's that aspect where one, like a good vocation of just kind of stewarding the little bit of earth that I have, I get removed from that. But then also like you lose those opportunities for camaraderie where you work on things.
Yeah.
And as I'm saying that, that I think is a big issue that plagues the church.
Yeah.
To where it's like, okay, so, if you go back 150, like in Fort Wayne's a good example. You've got Methodist Hospital. I don't know if that one's still around. You've got Luther Hospital or the Lutheran Hospital. And then you've got a Catholic hospital.
Yep.
Right. So those were hospitals that were started by the different church bodies because they were doing, charity and trying to help people. But now we've just kind of sent that off to the government.
Yep.
And so now the government takes care of it. And what that does is it actually removes the opportunity for us to do service to the neighbor.
Yeah.
So as you get more wealthy, then you just kind of outsource these things. And you're just like, well, I don't really want to help give this person a ride. Like, I'll just pay for an Uber. Here's $100. Like, grab a taxi and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I think so it does distance us from people. I think we also just believe things about money that aren't true. I just recently had a conversation with a member who was offered a job and it was going to have a long commute. And he was like, well, but it's a lot, it's significantly more money. So I think it's worth it. And I'm like, do you think about what this means?
Mm-hmm.
This is, you're talking about, 12 hours a week of family time that you're losing, right? Your employment's not losing that 12 and a half hours a week of your commute.
Mm-hmm.
That's all coming out of evenings when you should be with your children, right? And what's it worth? But there is this when it's hard, when it's we're the people making the choice for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Money just seems like it's going to really solve a lot of problems and it's going to be worth it. And I just think we become very kind of dumb that we think more money means more good. And we think money can do things that it can't. Right. And there's just like all of these examples of like these lottery winners, right?
Yeah.
Who are just deeply unhappy, whom the lottery has ruined. And, there's every kind of rock, biography on VH1. I don't know if that even exists anymore, but there used to be.
Yeah.
Remember those? And they all follow the same arc.
Uh-huh.
The rock star, right? They can't handle the money. They run everything. I just saw, you don't know who this is, but Rob Cross won the World Darts Championship 3 years ago.
I think I've seen clips of this.
No, you're thinking of the new guy because he's 17 and he's very...
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
Anyway, this other guy, he won a few years ago. First time. It was a big come from behind story. He was an electrician. Now he's a dart star, right? And all of a sudden, that tournament, in those days, just 3 years ago, it was $500,000. One dart tournament. There's some real money to be had in this. Anyway, he's bankrupt. He owes the government in England over $500,000 because he couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
And he's a decent human being by all accounts, and seems like it. Anyway, we should know this, but we sort of don't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Our fallen flesh says, well, I understand the warnings you're issuing, God, but I'm willing to risk it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
I think I could handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And that just shows that what we trust is money. Or I use this all the time, like with my, like you have members, right, that are struggling to come to church on Sunday morning. It's hard for them to come to church. You call on them, right? Why aren't you coming to church? We want you to come to church. You need to come to church. Like, yeah, I know. But Sunday's my only day to sleep in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, really? What about Mondays? Why don't you sleep in on Mondays? What's stopping you? Well, I have to go to work. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you just tell your boss it's your only day to sleep in?
Yeah.
Well, no, because if I don't go to work, I won't get money. Yeah, so what? Guess what you don't get if you don't come to church? The forgiveness of sins. Well, that's not as valuable as money.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the flesh, right? The flesh does not miss work,
Mm-hmm.
but it misses church.
Yeah.
Because it loves money.
Mm-hmm.
That's avarice.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not actually advocating missing work,
Mm-hmm.
of course.
Yeah. But the point is you can only serve one master.
Yeah.
And they are often at odds with each other.
And we don't miss work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, normal, regular church members don't miss work. They
Mm-hmm.
go to work. They don't, because they believe it's important.
Yeah.
Because they need money. Money matters.
Yeah. And what's the Bible verse? Might be in the Sermon on the Mount where you can only have something once you give it away. What's that?
I don't think that's in the Bible. That sounds like
God rewards those who do help themselves.
Cleanliness is next to godliness.
Yeah.
You can only get something if you give it away. Sounds like a hallmark. Maybe it is.
I'm
going to show my ignorance now. I don't know.
There's something. Yeah, that's definitely not a direct quote. Are you searching for it, Bennett? Nothing. Oh goodness, what is it? Or it might be with the one who's willing to lose his life.
Oh, there we go. There we
Yeah.
go. That's good. Okay.
Yeah,
yes.
there we go. Okay.
That was
Back
better
on the
said.
biblical track. So, but there is, but I do like this notion of, as you hoard something, you actually don't have it. It's like the whole like grains of sand, right? As you like clench it, it goes away.
Right.
So there is this aspect of you being able to, once you're willing to lose something, then it no longer has that control over
That's
you,
right.
and then
You're
you can
not a slave.
actually,
The love of money is the root of all evil. I mean,
Yeah.
that's in the Bible, and it's true.
Mhm.
When Edmund, it's not Edmund, it's the other boy in the
Peter?
Eustace. Eustace.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, Eustace turns into the dragon.
Yes.
That's a great scene
Mm-hmm.
over the greed. Oh, another one that's sort of, well, maybe this is gluttony, but where was this? I was trying to remember how this goes. This thing about the Turkish delight. Oh yeah. The Turkish delight only makes you hungrier for Turkish delight.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't actually satisfy.
Yeah. And the person will go on eating it until they kill themselves.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. But it's not like you eat the Turkish delight and you go, wow, that was great.
Mhm.
Satisfied.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's why I do think that when you speak to like, giving to church or tithing, there's an aspect to where, well, I mean, kind of back to in our previous discussion in the previous interview, there's this aspect of, well, is that law or gospel?
Yeah.
And it's going to be both in different ways. And the law aspect is like, well, like, no, do this.
Yeah.
Like support the community.
Just do it.
Like do it. But the gospel aspect that's there is like, it's actually then for your own good.
Right.
Like if your goal is not to be a dragon, right, and for your goal to consume you and own you,
right.
then like the very tangible thing you have to do, like if you want to wrestle against avarice, like the only thing you can do is try to give it away.
That's right.
And then once you give it away, then you're exercising yourself so that like, okay, this thing is not that important.
That's right.
Not that
Doesn't
important.
control me.
It's not that important. And then that calibrates you.
Yeah. Luther says one time, the last part of a man to be converted is his wallet. You heard that
Mhm.
before?
Yeah, I think that's very true.
I do too. I mean, just experientially, when I see people, come into the church, I mean, it just takes a lot. And some people actually never get there,
Mm-hmm.
right? They just can't ever really become cheerful givers.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned, I'm very thankful for this. I learned a lot of things getting married and a lot of things from my wife. And one of the most important was tithing.
Mm.
And this was from her dad, but it was just, this is the way it works. You get your paycheck and 10% off the top goes to the church,
Mm-hmm.
period. No questions asked, no budget setting, no thinking about anything else.
Mm.
The first thing you pay. And it's just like, it's never yours,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, when you think about how much money you make, you don't even think about that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is just, I love it. It's kind of legalistic in a way. I mean, it's just sort of a very rigid rule, but I couldn't believe how freeing it was because I wasn't a good giver. I never really, and then it was like, it just took it away. And what I have found in my own life is that by doing this, it is such a freeing thing that I feel like I've met my obligation. I don't mean I'm righteous by it, but I just mean, look, this is kind of the standard. This is the expectation. And I don't want to be, I'm not talking about tithing mint and right. I don't care exactly how you figure this out. You want to take, pre-tax income I don't care. I don't care. But 10% just makes sense. That's the kind of biblical standard. We don't do less than the Jews, period. Right. I mean, this is how it works, right?
Yeah.
It's not, Jesus didn't come to make things easier. And so I love that. It's just, boom, this is a nice number. I tell our people, you just pick I think that should be your goal. But you pick your number, right? I don't care. I don't care if it's 2%. Pick it, take it off the top, first fruits, right? Sacrificial. But then what happens for me is like, we've given this 10%. And now anything else that comes along that we want to give to, I feel no obligation.
Yeah.
But we do because we love the things. So a missionary comes and visits our church and tells us about this, and wow, that's great. God be praised. We want to support that, and we give them $100. The organ's raising money, the youth group's going on this, all these things. And now we don't have little kids at home, so things are a little different, and money is a lot easier. But I mean, it's 17-18% of our income, and it's pure joy.
Yeah.
Because I'm not paying any attention, right? It's just not that hard. And all these little extra things are a joy because I feel no obligation or guilt or pressure.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's just my own kind of flawed mind.
Well, but what I hear you saying is it's freeing.
It is freeing,
right?
Though. And I'm not claiming, I'm a better Christian because we do this,
which is built into that Bible verse, which says
right.
You don't own something until you give it away.
Right. Which is
not a Bible verse again.
To not have to think about it, I think is to not have to think about it, to not wonder how much we're going to give, to not wonder if we can afford it. I mean, I don't even, so my father-in-law is a pastor, and he taught us this or taught her this, and she taught me this, and then he used to always say that he'd never known. I mean, this sounds really evangelical, and he is no evangelical. But he always said he never knew of anybody who tithed who couldn't pay his bills. And I mean, now that's a very anecdotal thing, and I don't know how he knows who tithes. But I think there's probably, again, it does seem to be a correspondence. It changes your relationship with money.
Yeah. So
anyway,
that's good. Want to go to sloth?
Yeah, let's go to sloth.
I think sloth is, I heard a good little anecdote for sloth. What was it?
I'm glad we've converted you on the pronunciation.
Yes, you just bluntly won that one out over the course of this interview.
Sorry.
It's what? So one way to put it is it's the act of not doing something when there's something to be done.
Yeah.
That's one. There's another good little anecdote I heard that's even a little better than that. It's a little more hyperbolic in nature. It's like something like well, I mean, you could use the Proverbs one where whenever it's talking about the sluggard. Yeah. It's like this, like the door turns on its hinges, so does the sluggard in his bed. But I've heard it said that that's one of the main ones that's plaguing our culture today.
I think so, yeah.
Is that this movement towards sloth, like just staying in your pajamas and, watching TV. And it's just like, just spending your life, not really even like, I've heard it's like it's most pitiable of all of these.
I agree.
Because it's just like, you're not even doing anything. You're just like, you're just wasting your breaths. Right?
Yep. You're just, right. Yeah. And what about the time? I think about with sloth, the time that's wasted watching television or watching YouTube videos or playing video games or whatever. Again, it's away from people, right? Kind of in your own little world. And not that there's no place ever for kind of mindless entertainment or kind of escape. But it's just so addictive, and it goes by so quickly. And the time's gone forever.
Yeah.
And And then when you like as a dad, right, or
Mm-hmm.
a husband, you're thinking, what could have I done with that time? You know,
Yeah.
who could have I been with in that time?
Mm-hmm.
That really becomes kind of damning
Yeah.
and difficult to escape from. Another thing that in all of these is this whole, the perfect's the enemy of the good.
Mm-hmm.
You brought this up with the lust thing, right? Well, I've already broke the commandment. I'm already in there. But I think a lot of this too is like you just pick whatever it is. It could be greed, right? If we're talking about tithing, the problem is I can't give 10%, so I'm just going to give nothing, right? No,
Mm-hmm.
something's better than nothing,
Mm-hmm.
right? I can't work out straight for 45 minutes, so I'm not going to do anything,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm going to work out like a madman. I'm going to be so sore I can't do anything for 5 days, and then I'm never going back, right? So we got to ease into some of these things, and I
Mhm.
think we've got to kind of recognize that, right, something's better than nothing, right? We're not earning our salvation with these things. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
We do need, for our own good and for the good of our neighbors, to do something.
Mm-hmm.
So, sloth, it's hard to give up the digital devices, or it's hard to give up video games, or it's hard to give up this, but okay, well, don't give them up,
Mm-hmm.
right? But cut them.
Yeah.
Don't starve yourself, but just don't eat dessert.
Yeah.
Find a way to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think fasting plays a big role in these last three. I mean,
I do
gluttony is
too.
probably the most straightforward, but so we've talked about this before, but I've done for a couple years. I did not do it this year. I did kind of a version of it, but Exodus 90 is something I've done. And one of the cool things about that is, kind of the traditional fast is going to be food, right? So it's going to deal with gluttony. And then gluttony ends up playing with lust,
Right.
Stomachs, they're close there for a reason. But then, like, what I liked about Exodus 90 was it also forced you not just to like remove things, but then to do hard things. So the one thing I actually did grow to like, I hated it immensely at first, but was you had to take cold showers.
Okay.
Right. And cold showers are miserable, particularly in Minnesota. Like, the water is very cold here.
I bet.
And, and that was, you could only take cold showers. So it wasn't like, well, you got to do 30 seconds of a cold. It was like, you only take cold showers. And the nice thing there was it did train you to do a hard thing.
Yeah.
And then once you get through that hard thing, you did not want to go do another easy thing. Like, you wanted to go do the next hard thing. And that's kind of the opposite of sloth. It's just saying, what's the next right thing to do?
Yeah.
And I think one of the keys is to do that first and foremost in the morning.
Yeah.
And I ebb and flow. We just had our fourth, and everything's up in disarray right now. I'm up late with baby, and then I am not up when I would like to be. It's just, that's how it goes. But point being, when you start off and you do something hard, then you want to do the next thing, and that just sets you on a trajectory. And then on the opposite, I can just tell, like, once I like start to remove those things and I start introducing comfort, then you look for the next comfort and the next comfort, and it happens so quickly, where you're just overwhelmed by just doing nothing, and just kind of whatever. You can hang out on your phone, or you could just like, not be physically active, or then it's really difficult for you to get on the ground and play with your kids. It's just like those two things are so polar opposite, and you're going in one direction or the other.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the classic thing is, right, it's hard to eat one Oreo.
Yeah.
Right. It's way easier to eat no Oreos than it is to eat one. Because once you start, that pleasure just can't get it right. And, or like when you're fasting, right, you're fine until you start eating. And then it's just like you feel like you can't stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And there is this sort of sin begets sin, weakness begets weakness, and strength kind of begets strength, right? And learns to rejoice in resistance. And there's such satisfaction that again is I think a gift, right? I mean, it feels good to have something finished, to accomplish something. And I mean, I'll tell you, for me, like, probably this doesn't happen to me very much anymore because I've changed my ways. But if I go home at night and go to dinner and my wife asks me what I did that day, and I can't quite remember, feels like I just did nothing all day and I don't know what I did. Man, that is the worst feeling practically to me. And, and what was I doing in those days that, well, I don't know, I was sort of fooling around on the internet, and I was reading a little bit, and I was trying to kind of write a sermon, but it was just disorganized and scattered and not productive. And I don't think I wasted the whole day exactly, but I wasted a lot of it. And then at the end of it, I can't tell her what I did. And that's horrible.
Yeah.
In a kind of similar way, so now I'm like, I like a lot of this productivity stuff because I want to be able to get something done. I don't want to be busy. I hate being busy is no virtue.
Busy.
Right. Productive is what I want to be. I want to get something done. And so, if I could say I did a podcast, hey, in my world, that counts as doing something, probably in yours too. Yeah. So if I could do that, if I can, I finished this article, I can, right. It's got to be, I need things I can measure, things I can see things I can feel. And I agree with you. I think that that one thing does lead to another. There is, of course, again, pride can come into that, but I think there is a legitimate satisfaction in doing your duty, right? And just feeling good about what was accomplished today.
Yeah. So pride in doing the right thing.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say for
the right intention.
Right intention. Or with our evangelism efforts, right? I've tried to figure this out. Like, what's the ratio? How many people do I have to talk to before one of them comes to church? And then how many people come to church before one of them joins? And then how many of those people are still members in 5 years? It's not very good, the numbers. I mean, I think it's probably, it might be as high as like 1 out of 30 or 40. Right. So
that go from showing up to church.
I was going to say total contacts, right?
Contact to,
but these are fairly good contacts. I'm not talking about knocking on, I'm talking about, I talked to somebody at a wedding. I talked to somebody, personal kind of relationship stuff. It takes a lot of, right. And I mean, the Holy Spirit could work on every one of them. I'm not trying to control it, but I'm just saying, seems like on average, I talk to 30 people, 5 of them will show up to church. 2 of them will join, right? 1 of them will still be there in 5 years.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way, that's kind of my experience. So like if this was a car dealership, you got to have all those contacts. You got to be just working the thing all the time. But but in that process, right? Sometimes, right? Somebody comes to church and either or somebody talks to them. I mean, a lot of times, obviously I don't have anything to do with it. Somebody comes to church, right? And then, I'm pretty on this. Somebody visits our church. I try to visit them if at all possible that week. I make contact that week.
Yeah.
Right. We don't let those go by. And, I go visit them and then it goes however it goes. And then they either come back or they don't. Right. Or they have more questions or they don't. And if I go and I do that like I'm supposed to and they don't come back, I'm fine. I feel fine about it. But sometimes I miss it. I mean, not very often. And then even if they come, I feel terrible.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like I got lucky or, I'm humanly speaking, but it's like I cannot stand the feeling of having a duty that I didn't fulfill. I would rather fulfill my duty, do what I'm supposed to do and have it fail than not do it and get away with it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Just do the next right thing.
Yeah.
Right? And then it's outside of your hands.
It's outside of my hands.
Yeah.
And I look, I did my job. We lose. I mean, it hurts to lose members no matter what the reason. I mean, every one of them is personal, right? So I don't want to lose members for any reason. But there's sometimes we've lost people and it was for the right reasons. Like they didn't believe what we believe.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, well, I did everything right by them. We treated them right. We had assimilation. We catechized them. We were kind to them. We followed up. We didn't, right? And we lose them, fine. Other people, right, they just quit coming and we kind of don't notice. And then it takes a while to get a hold of them. And then, right, that doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, there's just that kind of reality of the way that this goes. And I think I'm just agreeing with what you said, I guess, but think about how this kind of lives out in ministry and in family life.
Yeah. God created us for work.
Yeah, he created us for work.
I mean, pre-fall, we had work to do to steward. So
that's right.
There's this aspect to where, sloth is going against even something that was, there pre-fall.
I don't get the lawn thing though. That's like that's very typical. Guys that just like are so satisfied to see the lawn mowed.
Yeah, what the best thing is? My son, who's 4, is fully trained on this. So weeds are pretty bad up here in Minnesota, and I forgot to put a pre-emergent on. I didn't actually forget, but I didn't because we were were doing some other stuff in the spring as far as doesn't matter. We were blading new seed and aerating and, all this kind of stuff. So the weeds pop up. So at first I'm like, okay, I'm going to manually get all these weeds out. Ooh. So I would bring my son with me, and he would stay with me for like 40 minutes. And he was just dead set on, and he's like the weeds came from Satan, right? And I was like, yes, son, you're right. Like the weeds are from Satan. Like God did not, And so now he's like, we'll go out of the back porch, and I'll be like, Dad, like there's a weed down there. And he's fully caught the bug, making a monster out of him.
Yeah, we probably are.
Oh man. Maybe two other quick things on sloth, and we can move to gluttony. One, just I cannot advocate enough for just like kill screen time.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing that I would raise the flag for our family is my wife and I don't watch TV. And actually, as I'm thinking about it, the Tour de France is coming up, and that's something we do like to watch. Yeah. So that's kind of like our yearly thing. But we never watch TV, and it's so nice, because it just frees up, and you just realize like we don't watch. I mean, the kids maybe once a week they'll watch TV or something like that, and we try to make it not just a babysitting thing. We try to make it more of like, okay, now we'll watch a Little Bear or something like that. But it's removing that is so nice, and you just realize how much other stuff there is, and you realize how much of a suck of like real joy. Watching TV is not real joy. It might be. I mean, going to a movie or everyone, that's fine. I'm not saying you should never ever watch TV, but we spend a ton of time on the screen. And I remember talking to Adam Kuntz one of the times, and he just reads so many books. I was like, so you're a speed reader, right? Like you have to be a speed reader. And he's like, no, I'm not a speed reader. I think he's lying. I think he's a speed reader. But he's like, he's like, people have no idea how much time they waste. And that was his whole point. It's just like, I just use my time to read and do these things. And people would be surprised how many books they could read if they just spent the time doing it.
Right. And
he's got 9 kids.
I know.
Yeah. So anyway.
No, he's impressive. I think he's right, but we do waste a lot of time, mm-hmm. and we should be rebuked for that and do better. I think at the same time, I do think he's a little extraordinary. He's a little extra.
Don't let him hear that though. Gluttony. I love your brother's a big Dave guy, right, Bennett? Is he coming here? Oh, okay. Nice. Dave Matthews, man?
Oh, Dave Matthews, man.
Ramsey.
Dave guy. How's Dave Matthews get into gluttony?
He's got this song, Too Much. You know that song, Bennett? I drink too much. I eat too much. I smoke too much. Too much. And it's the gluttony song. Oh, and I just, every time I hear that, because when I'm doing yard work, I'll blare Dave Matthews. I'll listen to their live albums. And every time that song comes on, I'm like, that's the song for gluttony. And like I said earlier, you're trying to take the whole world and shove it in your mouth.
Yep.
And I could be wrong in this, but I really think gluttony is a masculine sin. Mm. By that, I mean, men are geared towards that. I know very little like women that are just like naturally always want to go to the excess. And
it's a good point.
Almost all guys I know, unless if they really wrestled with it, like they always want to go to the excess.
Yeah.
I think envy is actually something that's, pride's maybe a little more masculine. I don't know. It can happen, but I think usually like the feminine sin is a little more envy, right? So if you think of like the way sexual sin plays out, like men have a base lust desire. Like we've got a biological, drive that's different from women, but we also have like when it comes to pride, there's always a pride, and a man wants to know that he can have women.
Yep.
Right. So there's this kind of ego boost. A woman wants to be desired. Right. So I think when you see adultery, you can see it. Sometimes it's just base lust, and but usually I think it's kind of this kind of hyper ego megalomaniac that just wants to have more. Yep. And that comes from the guys. For the woman, it's always like she's looking for others to praise or desire her. Right. Which is in the base, like she's supposed to be praiseworthy. Right. I mean, like she's supposed to have kind of the praise of the husband. Right. And that's where that goes awry. So I do think there's kind of masculine, feminine differences the way that these
I do too
sins manifest. But I do think gluttony is a very that plagues men.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's So I think it's hard to talk about masculine and female virtues because of course women need to be courageous. Of course men. I think where you can see kind of the differences actually is in vices a little more clearly. For example, I think we would all agree that it's more sad if a man abandons his family for physical fear
Mm-hmm.
than a woman,
Mm-hmm.
than a mother that would do that.
Yeah.
Right. It's like more shameful for a man to do that.
Mm-hmm.
In a similar way, it would be more shameful for a mother to neglect her children.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean it's okay for a man to neglect, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is this, women were made for nurture,
Mm-hmm.
and, men were made for, kind of the work,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the defense,
protecting.
providing and protecting. And I think gluttony is related to the providing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the kind of glory of battle and, those
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things, that all of that kind of excess that comes about.
Mm-hmm.
And, we can sort of understand it at a human level that, if you survive a battle,
Mm-hmm.
I suppose I haven't survived a battle, but, that kind of emotional release and so forth. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that's exactly right. You don't see that, or you don't see gluttony exhibit itself in the same way in women.
Mm-hmm.
I think the sexual thing's interesting too.
Mm-hmm.
I think that women are prone, right? Not all women, but women are prone to use sex for power.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think there are women that actually enjoy destroying men.
Well, yeah.
Destroy a marriage just to prove I can.
Yeah. That's
kind
the
of
Jolene one.
Yeah.
Jolene, please don't take him even though you can.
Yeah.
There's
there is this there is this kind of power thing, and it has to do with, I'm so desirable, I'm so beautiful that I can, right, bring the downfall of somebody. I think men, this is an interesting, again, I don't want to be vulgar, but I think that always, like adultery and pornography, require a kind of, it's a fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you go to a prostitute,
Mm-hmm.
right, the men that go to prostitutes are pretending in their own minds that the woman loves them.
Mm-hmm.
They want the woman to want, right? We want to be desirable to the wife. We want to be seen as strong. We want to be seen available. We want to be wanted. And I think that men that go to prostitutes, they're engaged in a fantasy. Adultery,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, at least in our circles, I've never suffered members to engage in one night stands.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been love affairs.
Yeah.
And I've had, brothers in the ministry, and you're thinking, well, how did you think this was going to end?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How did you think this was going to, because when they're engaged in it, they just totally go into fantasy world.
Mm-hmm.
And they just pretend and imagine they're somehow going to marry this woman and it's all going to be okay and everybody's going to understand.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy,
Mm-hmm.
right? What they're imagining is so delusional.
Yeah.
And pornography is the ultimate kind of delusion,
Yeah.
right? Well, any kind of masturbation,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The guy's not looking at his own hand,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's in his brain,
Yeah.
somewhere else, which is really pitiful.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I don't know how that plays into gluttony, but I think it's, as you said,
lust and gluttony are also very,
very
maybe
close
just, pride and envy are very close, and then gluttony and lust on both sides, they're kind of,
yeah.
You maybe think of like Jezebel, and then you've got Herod's wife.
Oh yeah.
Right.
And yeah, niece. Yeah.
Is that what's her name? Salome. That's Herod's wife?
Niece.
Niece. Okay.
Right.
And then Salome's the daughter. Is that right?
Well, he's married to Herodotus, isn't it?
That's it. Yep.
Yeah. And Salome's her daughter.
Okay.
So his niece.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Niece. N-I-E-C.
Oh, I'm sorry. What did you?
Yeah. I thought you were naming someone. I was like, I don't know.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so there's this aspect of, she's the Jezebel.
That's awful.
Right. And there's this pitiful nature that happens when a man's kind of caught in that lust. And like you said, like the woman uses it for power, and she uses it there to get Herod to do the very thing he doesn't want to do. Right.
Yeah.
And Herod's such an interesting character there, because it's like John the Baptist is calling him out, but then Herod still wants to go. It says he likes to go listen to him.
Yeah.
So there's kind of cool imagery there of just like people can't help but have some kind of like desire for truth, right? So John the Baptist is speaking truth, and he hates it, but at the same time, he like has to go listen to it, and he doesn't want to kill John the Baptist. But then what happens is like he's just controlled. He's lost all control. Certainly no headship. All of it's been completely reversed, and it's because he's he's been, the whore of Babylon has basically taken hold of him.
And he's emasculated by it.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. It's horrible.
Mm-hmm. Which happens with both gluttony and lust, right? As these things take control, they very much emasculate you.
Yep.
And you're kind of controlled by other things.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's so difficult. So it's so difficult to deal with like the pornography thing because shame is so deeply ingrained in this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, understandably, but I don't mean we shouldn't be ashamed, but we do have to kind of move past it,
mm-hmm.
right? We've got to talk about it. We've got to name it, right? We just can't skirt around this. Now, I don't think this is the sort of thing we can really talk about in the pulpit a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We got to be very careful how we do that. I mean, there are children present. We don't want to put ideas in people's heads.
Mm-hmm.
But this is one of the things that I think a men's group particularly has got to take on,
mm-hmm.
and the women's group too. Women can. There is a lot of things that can be done,
mm-hmm.
right, for healthy marriages, and it sounds people get annoyed with me for saying this, but I'm going to keep saying it because I believe it's true and it's
mm-hmm.
helpful. One of the things that is kind of most helpful for helping men overcome this, overcomes it almost too strong a word.
Mm-hmm.
Helping men to cope with this, to at least defeat it at times, right? And to work towards, because it's a slow, hard battle like quitting smoking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to go away easily. But one of the things that's very helpful is if the wife will hold the husband accountable.
Mm.
And there's multiple ways that she can do that. So to be sure, right, access to browser histories and phones and stuff like that, and controls and that kind of stuff. But also, if the wife will initiate intercourse,
mm-hmm.
so that he doesn't know exactly when it's coming and he's got to be ready.
Mm.
And this works at sort of several levels. So one thing, there's a kind of accountability thing there. It's also kind of a reward,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Right. And it feeds his need to be desired. So we talked about they go into this kind of fantasy thing. I think we underestimate the need for men to feel attractive, right?
Mm-hmm.
To feel loved, to be appreciated. It is kind of hilarious. I mean, not hilarious. It's all kind of really sad,
mm-hmm.
but like, men, so women are often like concerned because they don't compare to the images, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't compare to a Playboy model that's been airbrushed. It's fake, right?
Mm-hmm.
Real women don't look like this. Yeah, guess what? Men don't really care.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for the most part, right? They don't really need that much.
Yeah.
They aren't really looking for that. They're going to be far more satisfied and happy, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't mean to be too graphic, but I think we need some real aids for this. We got to name it. We got to work on it. We can't pretend like it's not real.
Mm-hmm.
Shame gets in the way, and that makes it harder to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But it's destroying marriages. It's
Yeah.
destroying churches, and it's just devastating.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Made me think of one. I have dealt with, I think your point's spot on. I've dealt with one case of adultery, right? Working through. And it was very much that from the man's standpoint, he felt like he was kind of doing all that he could to be, and he was very physically fit, and he strived towards this. And then his idea was like, well, why doesn't my wife, find me attractive? And then it ended up moving, elsewhere. Right.
Right.
And that was.
Yeah, it's so here's the dynamic, and I'm not blaming women, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not blaming women at all, but I think women fail to understand this dynamic. What happens is the guy goes off to work and he works all day, and the women at work are nice to him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They pay attention to him because they're in a kind of professional environment. Doesn't matter. They're nice to him. They're polite to him. They pay attention and they appreciate him. He comes home from work and there's the wife with 4 little kids and she's exhausted
mm-hmm.
and they've been crying all day and she hasn't an adult to talk to. And if he walks in the door and she's like, here's a baby with a dirty diaper.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's not interested in intercourse
mm-hmm.
and she's not impressed by his muscles, right? Our wives are never impressed by it, right? They're not impressed. I'm always flexing for it. She is not impressed. Look at this. It's impressive, but not to her, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, there is this, like, what happens is wives don't mean to do this because they're exhausted. They've been home all day. I mean, they've got their own baggage. but they don't realize they don't realize that their husbands are going off into Lilith's cave every day.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not taking care of things, it's not the women's fault, but they can do things to help prevent this, right? To pay a little attention, to not jump on him the second he comes in, because he's putting up with stuff at work all day too, but he doesn't want to maybe tell you about it because he's embarrassed or it's difficult. So again, there's got to be talking. You got to be paying attention. We got to keep the marriage bed pure.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to require a lot of effort, and it's going to have a lot of failures along the way. Another thing I like to talk about is seasons. So anyway, that's what happens to men, right? That they get enamored with a woman at work because she's paying attention. I mean, I can't even tell you how many. And I mean, this is really I probably shouldn't say. I'm going to say it anyway. I've seen these over the years. I've never seen a man have an affair with a woman prettier than his wife.
Interesting.
It's not about that.
Mm-hmm.
It just isn't. It's about feeling appreciated.
A couple that I've seen would line up with that.
Yeah, it's like, so, I mean, I'm sure there's some exceptions, and that's not an objective standard. Yeah. I get it. But anyway, we got to work on this, and there are ways to work on it. But we're also.
For the seasons, I can just.
Seasons.
Yeah. So I've reflected on that in that one of the challenges is, so I go into work, or my wife works a couple days a week. So we both go into work. And like you said, we have a certain professional hat that we put on. And when you're interacting with other people, you're kind of interacting with them at their best.
Yep.
Right. And so that takes place. Then you come home, right? And then at home, that's where all these trials are.
That's right.
Right. I mean, that's where the stress, especially if you have young kids, that's where there's stress, there's messes, there's chores to do. And so now, and also you kind of let down your guard a little bit, and you just, you go out and if I'm there at church on Sunday, I'm putting the best Brian forward, which I can do for a couple hours, right. As I'm hanging out with people and laughing. You can't do that always. So just by its very nature, your spouse sees you at your worst.
Yep.
Your coworkers never do. Right. And then as soon as you let that creep into your mind and you start to compare and contrast, and it's like, well, this person doesn't ever get cranky. Yep. My spouse gets cranky. It's like, well, this person goes home and gets cranky, Exactly so it's like right. you get only a certain picture of somebody else. You get a whole picture, which is good. That's what's supposed to happen in the vulnerable marriage relationship. But then if you don't, I don't know, maybe if you don't even hear this conversation we're having or have this conversation with yourself, then you take those two, and it's the same kind of thing with pornography, like you're saying. Okay, you've got a studio with lighting and all this other goofy stuff that's going on, right? So it's not real.
It's not real,
right? But yeah, you gotta figure out a way to say, nope, all of us have this, and there isn't this idea of this other better person out there, and da-da-da.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. That's why we get tricked by it.
Trick's a good word, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is, right? To tempt it. It's a trick. Yeah, so the seasons thing is the other thing that's, I think, important to talk about, that we're going to go through seasons. You're just in a statistically difficult time, right? 4 children under 5, a brand new baby. That's a hard time in life. And your marriage is under particular stress right now, and you're going to lose a lot of sleep. It's hard. And the kind of lesson that you need to know is it gets better. I know you know this. I'm not trying to belittle you,
but it is good to hear. Yeah.
But it will get better, right? Life does actually. It goes through times. There's times when it's hard. There's times when it's sad. There's times when, you're living a nearly celibate life for a while. It's not going to last, right? You have to be able to see sort of the light at the end of the tunnel and believe this and know this. And then, over time, we were talking earlier today about this kind of equilibrium idea. And I was saying, I really am thankful for this. I am a person that has a kind of emotional equilibrium that I've learned to sort of recognize. And I have times when I'm sad, but by the grace of God, I don't stay there. When I'm sad, it's rational. I'm sad for a cause. Something's made me sad. But it does. So that's first thing. It's not just sadness without cause. That's mental illness, right? But then the other side of mental illness is it doesn't endure, right? It's going to be a season. I've done this enough. I'm old enough now that I can recognize that I can be sad and I don't have this kind of fear it won't end.
Yeah.
Right. And the same thing on the other side. I can have these kinds of euphoric times. And I also know, well, this is nice. I should enjoy it, but it's not going to last. I'm going to kind of come back. And I think there's a kind of reality of that also even in marriage. You kind of come to know this. And I know this is going to sound so corny, but it's just so true, right? You do love I do love my wife more now than I did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, because, we've been through a lot together, and there is a real comfort there. and the joys of marriage increase.
Mm.
They really do. And it's different, but it gets better in a way. And that doesn't mean there won't be more bad times, or widowhood, and other difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of season thing's very important. We need to, I think the other kind of side of this is we've got to show, right? We can't present pastors in particular, leaders in the church. We can't present this picture to the church as though our marriages are this paradise on earth, right? That we've been through difficult times, that we've struggled, that we've fought, that we've had real crises in our marriage, maybe probably too personal to bring up, right? But we have to acknowledge that and not pretend like, oh, my marriage was always great. My wife's smoking hot and blah, that kind of ridiculous evangelical stuff.
Yeah. And that is helpful because, once again, there's the kind of the individual, but then let's say you gather there at church and you got a bunch of young families, well, like everyone's acting their best.
Everyone's
again, right? So then you look and you go like, wow, that looks like a happy couple. And like, well, they must not deal with these kind of stresses. So it is good to kind of say a lot like, depending on these seasons, there's going to be different challenges that everyone has to walk through.
That's right. There's going to be financial challenges at times. There's going to be sleep challenges.
Yeah.
You know about that one?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. And then disagreements about how to proceed.
Mm-hmm.
And then, failures and betrayals. I've got some deep shame about, I'm still ashamed of myself for things I did years ago that I just can't even believe. I drank too much one time. More than one time, but drank too much one time and insulted my wife, trying to be funny. And I just can't even believe that I did that. It hurt her feelings so bad. It's just unbelievable. That we do that to each other. And I'm not excusing it. I don't want to do it again. But there's things that, right?
Yeah.
Petty things. My wife's pretty good now at, you learn stuff. I was reading in Luther again about this. We had this interesting thing. He talks about how difficult marriage is quite a bit. And then he talks about how we're supposed to do this. And this interesting was under, I can't remember where it was. It was in Genesis. But anyways, he was talking about how a husband doesn't have the right to be gloomy because he kind of brings everybody down.
Yeah.
And this is a personal problem, right? Because again, put my best foot forward. I'm kind of an introvert. I get home at the end of the day. I'm just like, ugh, don't talk to me, leave me alone. And I'm sort of grouchy. And the problem with that is, right, I have a duty at home to, right, the way you lead your house by your attitude, by demonstrating, right, you set the tone, the emotional tone. If you're gloomy, everybody's gloomy. And even though it's only the two of us. And so she's just gotten really good at just being like, are you mad at me? And I love it when she does that because I'm just like, no, I'm not mad at you. And I'm acting like an idiot and a baby because I'm tired and I don't really want to hear the story about your hairdresser. And, but I'm being an ass, right? Listen to the story about the hairdresser. It's not really that difficult. And it doesn't require that much. And she's just talking because she wants to talk to me. And I'm acting like I'm mad at her and I'm hurting her feelings. That's terrible. I wish I wasn't like that, but thank God, I'm thankful that she's kind of knows how to a little bit call me out of it.
Yeah.
So
you learn and you grow, and
you grow, and then you learn new ways to hurt her and be stupid. But and she has to,
and that's the point of the 7 deadly sins, right? Is that they are, the big thing is, so it's sin. You can understand it playing out in all of these 7 different ways, and you can, like we said, you could use other categories if you want, but this one's pretty well proven, and there's some good literature kind of backing it. But it's just these things are, 1, they're deadly, but 2, they're always working, right? So it's like at the same time that like lust is working on you, your pride's working on you, and your wrath is trying to have you, and it's crouching at the door, and its desires to overcome you. And so being able to reflect on these things, to have the aspect of forgiveness built into this, is going to be so necessary. And particularly marriage is maybe one of the best ways to watch. You probably watch all of these things play out within a marriage.
Oh, for sure.
And then having that covenant relationship that's built around it, that it's like, well, divorce is off the table.
Right.
So what does that mean? Well, that means that we've had a disagreement, or I've done something stupid, or you've done something stupid, and that we knew that's going to happen.
That's right.
So now it's our job to work through this.
Yeah.
And if you do that, then, like you said, it grows, and you can say today, our marriage is better than it's ever been.
Yeah. And we believe Right. We believe that the gospel changes us, that the gospel empowers us, and that he does want to give us life abundantly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I mean, we're not the point of this kind of reflection isn't to, work ourselves up into a great fervor of guilt.
Mm-hmm.
The point of this is to see actually the opposite of this, to see what's good and to recognize that God has given us the abilities and the place to overcome this. We don't, right? Another problem we have is we sometimes do speak of sin as though it's inevitable. And that's statistically true.
Yeah.
But it's not true that we have to sin.
Yeah.
Right. We don't have to commit these sins. We do actually have the freedom to resist them and to say no to them. We're so weak. It's almost like we never do, but we can and we should and we want to. And he has given us, right? No temptation has to be succumbed to. It's not inevitable, right? Judas did not have to betray Jesus, right? I mean, somebody was going to, but I mean, right. And, God did foretell it, but Judas didn't have to do it.
Yeah. He wasn't being controlled by God.
No. And it's not, our sins aren't inevitable either. So, but what this does help us recognize again is just how incredibly weak we are and to remind us how dangerous these things are. This isn't child's play.
Yeah.
And we have to take them seriously. We do need to repent, and we do need to also rejoice in the good gifts that God gives and it's just kind of how gracious he is to us. Why? I bet he puts up with us.
Yeah.
You know?
One last thought, and then I'll let you finish if you want, and then we gotta go get Kuntz from the airport. But
leave him there for a while. Be good for his humility.
That's right.
He can read a couple books.
He'll get 2 or 3 done in time. But I mean, one of the helpful things when it comes to categorizing sin in this way, right? Just to kind of recap. I mean, it's just. You have to be able to, one thing I think that I shouldn't say we failed on, but like I've heard this done before and I really don't like it. I heard it in a sermon once where it was like, well, before, trying to talk about the pervasiveness of sin, I think. And basically the point, and this was years and years ago, by the way, this is not anyone that I know now, and they were just like, well, since the beginning of the service, you probably sinned 1,000 times.
Oh yeah.
And all that does, like once it's kind of back to that lust thing. It's like, well, okay, I've sinned 1,000 times apparently while I'm sitting here in church, listening to God's word, So all that's done is made sin something so indefinable that in the end it just becomes nothing.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, I don't know, I'm sinning all the time, so what? What is it? To where I think the real purpose of sin is to be able to say like original sin, like we've all fallen short, like we can't escape that is, our nature. But now we have to figure out actual ways to figure out exactly what this is. How is sin manifesting? And then get real specific and say, well, it's manifesting in this way. And that gives you the tangible thing to, use the mirror and, repent for something that's not just abstract, but, that's real so you can recognize the sin. And then third use to wrestle against something that is real and tangible, like you're saying, where it's like, I'm worn out at the end of the day, so I get snappy with people. It's like, okay, well, there's a real tangible thing. So now I can figure out, okay, I know that's something that I do. So now when that starts to come, I can call it by its name and I can start to wrestle with it or repent of it. But we have to get really specific with these things so it just doesn't become this I'm a sinner, I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm a sinner. Everybody is. It's impossible. I've sinned 1,000 times in the last 3 seconds. Therefore, it doesn't matter. No, I think that's spot on.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Well said.
Any last thoughts?
No, I think you got it.
Okay.
Good conclusion.
Well, 2 interviews in a day.
Hey, that was fun.
Yeah, well done. Bennett's going to get you your plaque. And
there we go. The 3-time club.
Yes. All right. Cheers.
Thanks, Brian.
Yep.